Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this kind of content, consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps a lot, and it keeps these long stories going. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What time is it right now where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? And if these stories help you sleep, feel free to tap the thanks button to support the channel. It truly means a lot. All right, let's get into it. I remember the night starting like any other Thursday, quiet, almost painfully so. I was on my 5th hour of the graveyard shift, patrolling the back roads of Calhoun County, Tennessee. My name is Brady Moss, I'm 32, and I've been on the force since I turned 23. By now, I should have known better than to think, just another night. But the moment I saw that blue Dodge Durango veer off the road onto the gravel shoulder at mile marker 14, I knew everything was about to go sideways. I was driving eastbound, radio playing low classic rock through the speaker, when the Durango's headlights flickered. One cutting through the gloom of pine trees, the other swollen and almost white against the charred black of night. The tires crunched on the gravel shoulder, and then the vehicle jerked, as if the driver slammed the wheel to the right. I killed the music, flipped on the cruiser's lights, and eased to a stop about 50 feet back. My chest felt tight. I reached for my flashlight and grabbed my sidearm, keeping it holstered but ready. The air smelled like rain. Humid, damp, and smelling faintly of diesel exhaust from some distant truck pulling logs down Highway 53. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I told myself to stay calm. I killed the engine, stepped out, and felt the gravel shift beneath my boots. The Durango's brake lights glowed an angry red, and the passenger side door hung open. I called into my radio, Unit 7-5, 2-10-13, field stop, possible disabled vehicle, checking on driver. No response. 10-4, Unit 7-5, came dispatch. That took too long, like a beat too many, and it sunk in that the driver might already be gone. I approached the open door, light slicing through the dark. Inside, the driver's seat was empty. I shone the beam through the windshield, angled it down to the floorboards, paper cups, empty fast food wrappers, and a half-rolled blunt on the seat. No blood, no sign of struggle. My flashlight beam drifted to the back seat. A child's booster seat empty, straps dangling like tangled rope. My stomach flipped. I crouched down, twisted to peer under the seat. Nothing, but there was a leather wallet on the edge of the console. I nudged it with my toe. It slid toward the passenger side, flips open, a Tennessee driver's license peeking out. Samuel Pierce, 29, Lenoir City. The name meant nothing to me, but that seat behind was supposed to hold a kid. My jaw clenched. I called out, "Sam? You okay back there?" Silence. Then I heard it. A rustle. Soft, coming from the woods on the passenger side. I swung my light onto the tree line. Tall pines, low-hanging limbs, and a trail of broken branches leading into the blackness. I radioed for backup. Unit 7-5 to dispatch. Suspect on foot, just fled the scene. Male, early 30s, dark hoodie, possibly armed. Last seen heading northeast into tree line. Request K9 and additional units. My voice felt too loud, echoing off the trunks. Dispatch clicked back. Copy, K9 en route. Be advised backup is 10 minutes out. 10 minutes. If he disappeared among those trees, 10 minutes wouldn't be enough. I clicked off the radio, slung my flashlight in my left hand, gripped my holster with my right, and stepped to the line of pines. The radio fell silent except for my breathing. I moved forward, branches grabbing at my jacket, needles pricking my skin. Any second I expected to hear him crack a twig or whisper my name. I felt the heat of adrenaline furnace fire in my chest. The ground beneath me was uneven, roots snaking across the forest floor, and the moon, a thin crescent barely lighting the way. My light was weak here. Every shadow looked like a man crouched in wait. I called out, "Sam, come out. It's the police. Show your hands." My voice sounded strained, cracking somewhere between command and plea. No response, just the faint rustle of leaves. I took another step, shining the light around. The forest didn't end. It stretched like an infinite cave beyond. I paused, feeling a bead of sweat slip down my temple. The echo of a distant bird call, nocturnal, hollow. I thought I heard breathing, but when I swung the beam to that spot, nothing. Only curved ferns and the dark swell of underbrush. I hesitated. Protocol said secure the scene, wait for K9, but this kid, this man, might be disoriented, hurt. He might have stalled the engine and realized his kid was missing, or worse. I felt a pang of guilt. I had been off duty a half hour earlier, debating groceries and laundry, and here I was chasing a man whose child might be out there. So I chose a slow jog, pushing deeper, keeping my flashlight aimed low to pick out broken branches, signs of a hurried path. My radio lay silent in my pocket. About 50 feet in, the ground opened up. An old logging trail, now overgrown, narrow at first, widening as it trailed north. I ducked under a low branch, and my shoulder scraped against something slick, sap, or maybe blood. A bead dripped to the forest floor with a soft, wet plink. I snapped my light to the ground. A crimson smudge on pine needles. My breath caught. I knelt, pressed my glove to the stain. Feels sticky, likely fresh. I stood quick, training my light on the trail. It led me uphill, a slight incline, and then I rounded a bend and saw him, Sam Pierre, crouched at the base of a gnarled oak, clenching his ankles, eyes squeezed tight. He was muttering something low, a trembling litany. Behind him, tangled in brambles, crawled a small form. A kid, maybe 5 years old, pale face pressed to the earth, whimpering. His hoodie was soaked crimson around the shoulder. The sight nearly knocked me backward. "Sam, hands where I can see them," I yelled. He jerked his head upward, eyes wild behind the hood. The kid's leg was twisted, pants torn, skin broken, blood welling. I dropped to my knees a few feet away, dropped my flashlight so its beam lit the boy's face. Kid's crying, too weak to speak. I lifted his chin, saw dried tears, a smear of dirt and blood on his cheek. My heart lurched. I reached for my radio, keyed it. Unit 75 to dispatch, emergency medical. I have a male juvenile, approximately 5 years old, serious leg trauma. Advise life flight. They replied, 10-4-75, advising EMS ETA 5 minutes. I keyed off. I knelt beside the kid, placing my hand on his shoulder. He flinched, but didn't scream. I took off my duty belt, used my shirt to apply pressure to the wound. Kid's hand twigged at mine. He whimpered. I turned to Sam, who stayed crouched, arms hugging his knees. "Why didn't you call for help?" I asked, voice low, calm. He shook his head, tears trickling down. I realized he was drenched in sweat, dirt smeared, and that hoodie covered a rib cage that rose and fell like a bird's wings. He said, She's... I looked toward the creek about 20 yards off. Water glinted under the moon, low and slow. If the kid's leg was injured earlier, maybe Sam dragged him this far. Maybe they stumbled down that embankment and Sam thought he could make it to road. The sight made my insides twist. He repeated, "She, my sister." I tried. I thought I could carry her, but she... He broke off, head dipped. I realized he thought the kid was his sister. I realized how disoriented he must be. Hunger, fear, adrenaline. I holstered my sidearm because he wasn't a threat. He was a wrecked man. I snapped back to the kid and scanned him. Deep cut, bone glimpsed through torn flesh. He needed a hospital. I ripped off a strip of my shirt, tied it above the wound, applied pressure. He let out a pained whimper. My light trembled in my hand. I reached into my vest, felt my last ampule of ketamine. Couldn't use it outside a warm clinic. I touched the boy's forehead. "Hang in there, buddy. Help is coming." His eyes rolled back. I brushed hair from his face. He was septic, drifting toward shock. I turned to Sam, voice steady. "We need to move. EMS can't reach us on this trail." He shook his head. I realized why. Guilt. Baptized in his own failure. I swallowed and said, "We're carrying him." "You hold his head, keep him steady. I'll carry his legs." He stared at me, eyes narrowing, suspicious. I held up my hand. "If I let you help, they might not take you in handcuffs. You do your part, we can save him together." He exhaled, nodding roughly, arms uncoiling. I knelt, sliding my arms under the kid's thighs. Sam slid under his shoulders. We lifted. The weight was lighter than I feared, maybe 30 pounds, but his limp carapace felt too light, like arguments piled on mortar. I swallowed and started trudging back down the trail. Branches snagged at our backs. The kid whimpered each time I shifted him. I forced my legs to keep moving. We covered maybe 50 yards when I heard the rustle, a stun of footsteps, close. I shone my light behind me. Nothing but waving undergrowth. Fear poked my spine. Maybe it was a deer, maybe it was someone else. Someone watching. I kept my gun hand-free but low. We moved on. The incline grew steeper. Sam started lagging. I strained against each step, kid's head lolling. I glanced at Sam's face. Wet with sweat, hollow-cheeked, haunted. Maybe he never meant for any of this. Behind us, the headlights of the cruiser flickered through the trees. Mine had been left on. Other headlights emerged. The EMT SUV, 2 cruisers, K9 team parked on the road above. I could hear sirens low. They hadn't turned them on yet. Thankful for that. They didn't know the full situation. I realized, if anyone followed me here, they'd see only an officer carrying this broken child, a man stumbling behind. No one would suspect the truth until the kid lost consciousness. I trudged on, each breath like dragging knives through my lungs. My boots burned where gravel bits jabbed at my skin. The weight summoned deep, pulsing ache in my lower back. We came to the crest of the hill. The forest opened to a rutted dirt road, moonlight splashing the ground silver. I saw the EMTs waiting, EV kits, stretchers at the ready. K9 hounds sat on leashes, tongues lolling, alert. Other officers stood behind cones of light, weapons holstered, concern etched on their faces. I stepped out onto the road and laid the kid on a portable cot the medic thrust forward. Sam knelt and cradled the kid's head, tears pooling at his chin. The medic barked instructions. "Hold pressure on the wound. We need to pack him for transport." Sam obeyed, though his hands shook like autumn leaves. I backed away as they loaded equipment. The medic gave me a nod and turned away. I swallowed the knot in my throat. Then I turned to Sam, who looked at me, eyes glazed, voice husky. I thought she was okay. I bit my lip, fists clenching. There was no time for lecture. I said, "What happened?" "Tell me exactly what happened." He swallowed, rubbed his knuckles against his forehead. He said, "We were heading back from my folks' farm in Lenoir City. She fell asleep in the back. I was too tired to stay awake. I just dozed off." Next thing I know, we went off the road. She hit her head on the side of the vehicle. When I woke her, his voice cracked. She was bleeding so bad I thought if I dragged her to that creek, I could wash the blood off, clean the cut. I found that old logging trail on my phone's GPS. I thought I could get her to the hospital if I carried her this far, but her leg was caught. I tried to free her, and I panicked. He choked back tears. I left her to look for help. My stomach turned. He left her, and that kid was his sister, not his daughter. Sam crouched beside the cot as the kid's eyes flicked open, pupils dark pools. The medic asked, "How long since the wound?" He said, "God, I don't know." "An hour?" The medic cursed. "Shit, that's septic level time." They loaded the kid into the ambulance. Sam sat on the tailgate as it closed, head down, shoulders trembling. I watched as the taillights receded, then turned to call dispatch. Before I could, a hound barked, K9 trotted out, sniffed at my boots. I crouched, let him sniff my hand. He licked my glove, then looked up. I petted his head. The lead handler jogged over. "Officer Moss, want us to search the car site?" We found tracks near the embankment. I shook my head. "Number, leave it. Drone team's on the way." He nodded. The K9 handler turned the dog, moving back. I leaned against my cruiser, staring where the ambulance had disappeared around the bend. Sam would be taken in. Statements, charges, maybe forgiveness. I was left with this night, feeling saturated by it. My vision blurred. I blinked at spinning headlights. I rubbed my face. The radio crackled to life. "Unit 7-5, all units clear?" I exhaled and said, "Affirmative, dispatch. 7-5, clear." I flipped off the mic. Darkness pressed around me. I realized the weight in my chest wasn't just exhaustion, but something else. Responsibility. Guilt. Backup arrived, slow trickle. Officers taking statements, calling for tow trucks. I watched them as they spilled lantern light onto the road. I felt like an outsider, like I'd crossed some invisible line. I climbed into my cruiser, sank into the seat, held my uniform collar away from my neck. The air conditioning kicked on, blowing cold into my face. I stared at the mountain of documents waiting at the station. The report I'd have to write. Driver found crossing onto gravel shoulder. Occupant fled. Juvenile male transported to UT Medical Center. No immediate suspicion of foul play. That lie would stick like cement in my throat. My phone buzzed. A text from Lieutenant Harris. "You okay?" Heard about the Pierce boy. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the read button. I finally tapped it. "Yeah, I'm fine. Kid's stable. Sam's in custody." I set it down. I thought of Sam's face, haunted, wild, rot under his nails. I thought of the kid strapped into the ambulance, unconscious but alive, barely. I thought of the forest, that endless black as I stumbled through, calling for someone who might never answer. I started the cruiser, the engine rolling like a distant thunder. The air smelled of pine and diesel and sweat. I flicked on my lights, turned onto Route 53, headed north toward the station. Dawn would come, the sky would wash bright, but I'd be chasing this night for a long time, haunted by footprints in gravel. That girl's scream, my own fury as I realized how close I came to failing them both. And even if I never admit it aloud, I know deep down I'll remember every step, every breath, every heartbeat as I sprinted after a ghost into the dark, only to find something more broken than I could ever fix. Morning light seeped through the tall pines lining Route 53, the pre-dawn haze still clinging to the low-lying fields as I eased my cruiser into the station lot. My tires crunched over gravel, and the roar of the engine felt loud in that gray calm. I killed the motor, grabbed my notebook and pen from the center console, and stepped out. There was dew on the grass, tiny droplets clinging to clover leaves, reflecting that faint peach glow of sunrise. Everything looked so peaceful, like the night's horrors had never happened. But the smell of pine and damp earth made my skin crawl with memory. I trudged inside, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, and found Lieutenant Harris at his desk, rifles stacked neatly against the wall behind him. He glanced up, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep, and gave me a tight nod. "You okay, Moss?" he asked, not bothering to hide concern. I sank into a chair opposite his desk, dropped my gear on the floor, and exhaled. I paused, searching for words. "I'm fine." But fine felt like a lie. My hands still trembled just a little when I thumbed the pen cap off. "I've got the report typed up. Want me to walk you through it?" He pushed a mug of stale coffee toward me. I grabbed it. Bad coffee, but the warmth felt necessary. I shifted through my notes. Times, addresses, blood levels, witness statements I'd take later. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. "You sure you're okay?" Harris asked again, but mostly to the empty half of the room. I nodded, but it came out more like a bob of my head. I slid the notebook across, opened it to page 1. I began reading. 0400 hours. Officer Moss responds to unknown code in rural area. My voice felt hollow as I recounted every detail. Discovery of the Durango, sighting of Samuel at the base of the oak, the kid's injury, my decision to carry him uphill instead of waiting, the triage by EMT, Samuel's confession. I included how the kid's blood had soaked into my shirt sleeve, how Sam had fell to his knees when I asked what happened, how his voice cracked as he said, "She," my sister. I wrote, "Male juvenile transported by helicopter to UTMC, critical but stable." Then detailed Sam's escort to booking, charges pending. I finished that paragraph, paused, and saw Harris out of the corner of my eye. Leaning back, arms crossed, listening with those tired eyes you only see on cops who've pulled too many graveyard shifts. I closed my notebook, glanced at the clock on the wall, 5:10 a.m. I'd been sputtering through those lines for 10 minutes. Harris leaned forward, exhaled. "I'm taking Sam's statement this afternoon. He's stable, bruised, cooperative. Kid is critical, but they say he's a fighter." I nodded. "Good, that kid's tough." I lifted my mug, took a slow swallow. Bland coffee bit at my tongue, and I chased it with a sip of water. "Lieutenant," I said, "you got any idea how it turned out? I mean, did my carrying him help?" He narrowed his eyes. "Kid's alive, Moss, and I think you saved him. You did good." He tapped the desk. "Listen, you need to write your supplemental, your personal notes. You can't just file and leave it at that report. You were the first on scene, you chased Sam, you found the kid, you carried him. That goes in. I want a full timeline." I nodded because I had no choice. There were parts of that night I still couldn't stitch together. The way branches snagged my jacket, the flash of moonlight off those brambles, Sam's face contorting when he called his sister she, when I thought he meant a daughter at first. I needed to pour it onto paper before it shattered inside me. Harris handed me a manila folder with the blue Durango crime scene photos inside. The open driver's door, that leather wallet lying half spilled, the faint outline of blood on the passenger floor. I flipped through, then slipped them into my coat pocket. "I'll get it done," I said, voice dry. He nodded and returned to typing on his laptop, leaving me alone with my thoughts and that still stinging heat in my chest. I stood, stretched out my back cracks that popped like pistons, and headed for the locker room. My locker was the same as always. Uniform, neatly hung, boots aligned. I peeled off my jacket and shirt, tossing them into the hamper. I scrubbed under my neck, feeling sweat and blood congealed into a grimy film. The cold water running over my palms made me gasp. I closed my eyes, let it wash over, and tried not to relive that moment when I saw the kid's leg bent wrong. I slapped the water away and toweled off, then pulled on a fresh shirt and hung my uniform back up. Back in the break room, a donut box sat half empty on the table. I grabbed a plain one, took a bite, chewed slowly. The sugary dough felt wrong in my gut, but I ate it. Guilt followed. Around me, other officers streamed in from their shifts. Afternoon guys yawning, some with cups of coffee like mine, rumpled uniforms, badges pinned to chests. They glanced at me, half surprised I was back so soon. "Moss, you back? You all right?" they murmured, but I just nodded. By 6 o'clock I was parked at home, an old gray ranch with a creaking front porch in Jackson Heights. My wife, Stacy, was asleep when I stumbled in. I was itching for one more beer, but I knew sleep was all I could handle. I let myself into my bedroom, Woodstock posters on the wall, my worn leather jacket draped over a chair. My phone's screen glowed. 3 missed texts from her. "Hey you, how's your shift? Did you head home? Love you." I stared at the blue bubble conversation, saw the timestamps, 4:30 a.m. for the first text, 5:45 a.m. for the second. I tapped out, "Kid's alive. Sam's in custody. I'm okay. Be home soon." Hit send and watched that swirl of gray bubbles turn to blue. I peeled off my boots, socks still damp from sweat and mud, and slipped into a t-shirt and boxers. I crawled into bed. Stacy murmured something, snuggled closer. I pressed my face into the pillow, smelled her shampoo, and tried to let sleep swallow me whole. But as soon as my brain shut off, that night on the logging trail replayed. Branches snapping underfoot. The glint of a blade of grass in my flashlight beam. Sam's wild grin before he turned on his heel and vanished. I narrowed my eyes, heard that faint drip of sap or blood echoing under the oak. I felt the kid's wrist twitch against my palm, how his lips quivered when I spoke. I saw his sister, limp and face down on that plywood, skull fractured. I wanted to scream, to wake Stacy, but sleep held me in its death grip. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, I jerked awake, sheets tangled, sweat on my brow. I heard the coffee pot gurgle in the kitchen. I sighed, ran a hand over my face, 2 red crescents under my eyes. I wanted to call in sick, but my head was too heavy with guilt. I swung my legs off the bed and stomped to the shower. The water came out icy cold. I shivered as I lathered up the knots in my back. I let the water drag away the muddy sweat, but it couldn't touch the knot in my chest. I tried to scrub it out of my mind, but felt it coiling tighter. When I turned the water off, I stood under the towel, staring at my reflection in the fogged mirror. Eyes bloodshot, dark circles like bruises. I ran my tongue along my teeth, tasted metal. After I washed, I pulled on yesterday's jeans, a fresh t-shirt. I grabbed my keys, walked out to the kitchen. Stacy was sitting at the table, hair in a messy bun, already making coffee. She set a mug in front of me. I raised an eyebrow. "Mom called," she said, voice light. "She wants to know if we're going to Thanksgiving at their place." She folded the J-School newsletters, put them aside. "You didn't answer your phone last night." I lowered my gaze to the table. "Shift got out late." "Okay," she said, though I knew she wasn't convinced. She rested her hand on my forearm. "You good?" There it was, that question again, the one I dreaded. I met her eyes, green flecks, concern. "Yeah, I'm okay." I forced a smile. She nodded. Breakfast was silent, the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of fridge motor. I drank coffee fast, swallowing bitter notes, thinking of Sam, thinking of that kid, thinking of how I'd tell her. She wiped a crumb from my plate, then stared at me. I tried to look back normal, but I felt raw, hollow. She said, "Come back to bed before work. Lie with me a bit." I covered my mug with my hand. "Not right now." After breakfast, I grabbed my cruiser from the driveway and followed the same route back to the station, that dreadnought roiling as I neared the Polk County line. The station doors opened, fluorescent glare, the smell of stale coffee, rubber, printer ink. I slipped in, placed my keys in the rack, and got to work on that supplemental report. I sat at my desk. Photos spread before me now included close-ups, a smear of blood on the oak's bark, Sam's bloody footprints pressed into the mud, the kid's frayed shoe. I tapped the keyboard, recounting every detail, but I paused on each line. 0400 hours. Observed blue Dodge Durango off roadway, passenger side door open, driver's seat vacant. Initial search revealed no driver in immediate vicinity. Smell of decomposition or excrement strong inside vehicle. Notified dispatch for K9. Ascertained occupant's identity via Tennessee license. Samuel Pierce. Date of birth, May 12, 1992, Lenoir City. Obvious child safety seat in rear, but no juvenile present. Signs of disturbance. Half-rolled blunt, several empty containers, half-eaten food wrappers. Notified SAMU, Specialized Accident Management Unit, to process vehicle. While investigating, heard male voice emanating from dense woods north of vehicle. No answer upon verbal challenge. Pursuit initiated on foot due north into pine thicket. I forced myself to keep typing, though my hands shook, though I felt nauseous. I wrote until sweat beaded on my forehead, then stopped to rub my temples. I drank more coffee, felt the caffeine shaking my hands worse. My desk phone rang. I answered, "Moss." It was dispatch. "Moss, unit to contact Trauma 1 Hospital. They'll update on juvenile." I gripped the phone tighter. "Copy." I hung up, heart thudding. I jumped out of my chair, grabbed my coat, and headed to the cruiser again. Would drive to Trauma 1, check for updates. I fumbled with my radio. "Dispatch CT-75, ETA to Trauma 1. They clicked. 10-4-7-5. I jogged out to my cruiser, started the engine. The hum of transmission, the squeak of seatbelt, and I was off. Traffic was light. The morning rush wouldn't start for another hour. The sun had angled high enough to pierce through sparse clouds, stretching long shadows on the pavement. I kept the visor down, scanning frost-kissed fields. Early November chill in the air. I choked on sobbing thoughts of that kid. Had his name been Grace? I still didn't know. Family emergency forms hadn't come in yet. Sam's case file said, "Juvenile sister. Name withheld due to status." I pulled up the Trauma 1 address on my dash. Street name flashing. Murphy Road. I clicked the siren intermittently, just a soft wail to clear traffic. A red SUV yielded. An old sedan slowed. I cruised past them, lights spinning, and pulled into the Trauma 1 entrance. Paramedics and scrubs wheeled a gurney from the bay. I banked the cruiser behind an ambulance, dashed out. One nurse yelled, "Officer, you're back." "I need an update on the juvenile Pierce," I said, adrenaline prickling my veins. She glanced at the chart hanging on the drape. Minimal brain bleed, deep laceration on thigh, surgery complete. Staying ICU at least 24 hours. Risk of infection high but stable vitals now. They named her Ellen. Her name was Ellen. I exhaled, shoulders slackening. "How's Sam?" I asked, though I knew he was on his way to booking. "He's cooperating with detectives. They're interviewing him now, his sister's stable." I nodded. offered a tight-lipped thank you, and turned away. I leaned against a wall, eager to hear the hum of AC, the beeping monitors, machines keeping her alive. I stared at the hallway, framed by flickering fluorescent lights. A doctor in scrubs came out, cuffed a clipboard to his side. I approached, cleared my throat. "Doctor, Moss, County Police. Can you tell me anything else?" He glanced at me, eyebrows drawn. "Officer Moss, I'm Dr. Patel. Leg injuries drained, infection on track to clear. Brain bleed minor, but child would need rest. No signs of long-term neurological damage. Name's Ellen Pierce, age 5. My throat went dry. "Thank you." I stepped back, chest tight. I realized I had no right to be there. Parents would be arriving soon. I knocked on the glass of the ICU door, peered through. There was a small child's body draped under blankets, tubes connected, sleeping or sedated. A glowing heart monitor beeped steady. I swallowed. I sent a quick text to Harris. "Pierce girl, stable. Minimal brain injury, surgery successful." I slipped my phone away, closed my eyes, and steeled myself. I had to call Sam's brother. No, his birth mother in Lenoir City. He'd called someone, but I wasn't given that info yet. Child welfare might handle notification. Still, I felt responsible. I wandered back to the lobby, hands stuffed in pockets, and sat on a vinyl chair facing the main doors. Humans walking in and out, relatives clutching flowers, doctors rushing by. I felt exposed, like everyone knew I was the one who chased Sam into that forest. 2 officers came in, uniformed backup from last night standing behind a detective. Detective Gardner, a tall woman with hawkish eyes, looked at me. "Hear about Pierce's sister?" she asked. I nodded. She led me down a corridor. "She's stable. He's in the interrogation room if you want to talk details." I followed her past sterile walls, white and pristine. We reached a small room, lights dim, table in center, 2 chairs. Sam sat hunched over in one, hands cuffed, eyes hollow. He looked up, saw me in uniform, and stiffened. His face was haggard, stubble cut on his cheek where a branch must have snagged him. I swallowed, turned to Gardner. "You want me in?" She nodded. I nodded back, sat opposite Sam. "Samuel Pierce," I said, voice low. He glanced down. I continued. "You remember what happened after you left Ellen behind?" He stared at me, breathing shallow. I saw those lights. I panicked. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the table. I leaned forward. "Why'd you think she'd survive if you left her?" I thought someone would find her." He flinched at his own words. "I tried to get help. My phone died. I saw your lights. I thought I could outrun you." He stared past me, voice breaking. "I didn't want to get in trouble. I thought just 1 minute alone. Maybe I could figure out what to do." I said nothing, feeling rage and pity swirl inside me like a storm. I recognized that choice. Leaving her behind was wrong, but I'd wasted 10 minutes chasing him instead of finding her. I swallowed hard. "He said he saw her," Gardner interjected from the doorway. "He said he found her," her voice caught, "and her skull was caved in. He thought he could save her, but—" I closed my eyes, rubbed my temples. "That creek was shallow," I muttered. "If he'd stayed with her, she might have lived." Sam's shoulders slumped. He stared at the table, tears leaking. Gardner cleared her throat. "Charges will likely be involuntary manslaughter, neglect. We'll let DA handle it." I nodded, but inside I felt like vomiting. I stood, passed Sam a water cup. He stared at it, lips trembling. I felt the room spin. I wanted to slap him, to yell at him, to console him. But I did nothing. I left the room, Gardner trailing behind. She closed the door, and I looked out that small window. Corridor, bright with sterile white light. I exhaled hard. I wandered back upstairs to the main hallway, past a janitor mopping floors. The smell of bleach burned my nostrils. I felt intense adrenaline fatigue. My uniform felt suffocating. I wanted to go home, lie on my couch, pretend none of this happened. But I had duties, evidence to catalog, interviews, statements. I went to my cruiser, slammed the door shut, and sat in the driver's seat. I realized my shirt was soaked with sweat and something else, coffee, maybe a drop of blood. I peeled it off and hung it on the passenger seat. I leaned back, stared at the sun beyond the windshield. That pale glow brought visions. Branches, dark hollows, the creek bleached with moonlight, Ellen's motionless form. My chest cramped with guilt and grief. I slid the key out, grabbed the shirt, and headed to the station. Inside, the phone rang again, my desk. I answered. Moss. It was HR. Officer Moss, did you submit time card? We need your signature. I responded, voice distant. Yes, one moment. I scribbled my signature, returned the form. The normality of paperwork slapped me like a cold slap. I turned back to my desk. Evidence photo prints lay waiting. The crumpled wallet, blood on the forest floor, a close-up of the Durango's fender where it straddled a rut. I organized them into the evidence folder labeled Pierce Incident, November 3rd. I placed the photos in plastic sleeves, sealed them. I stared at the photo of Sam's boots, caked in mud. I traced the imprint of the treads with my finger. A note on the folder read, "Delivered to DA by 1700. I nodded to myself and set it aside. I glanced at the clock, 7:15 a.m. I should have gone home by now, given statements at the hospital, made sure the Pierce family had resources. Instead, I was chaining myself to my desk. I shut off my radio to avoid any more calls. I pulled my chair back, marched down the hallway, and into the sergeant's office. He looked up from some forms. "Moss," he said, eyebrows raised. "Flying solo this early?" I closed the door, took a seat. "Just need to drop some things off," I said. I laid the evidence folder on his desk. He opened it, flipped through. "Good work on cataloging this," he said. "I'll deliver it to DA's office this morning." I nodded. "Thanks." He peered at me, concern in his posture. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a grin. "Long night," he exhaled, closed the folder. "Take a break, go see the kid." I blinked. "You mean an ICU?" He nodded. "Earned it." I hesitated, but that image of Ellen Pierce kept flooding in. The tubes, that beeping monitor, the small face so pale under the sheets. I realized I'd been avoiding it. "I will," I said. He nodded and returned to his paperwork. I stood, patted him on the shoulder, and walked out. I grabbed my cruiser keys, headed back out to the parking lot. The sun was higher now, making long shadows behind the station. I climbed into the patrol car, slid the shirt off the seat and tossed it into the trunk. I sat for a moment, closed my eyes, then started the engine. As I backed out, I tuned the radio to 101.9 FM, some old-school country station playing a slow ballad. It felt appropriate. The drive to Trauma 1 was quieter than before. No urgency now. I reflected on Sam's choices. Ellen's fragile life, the ripple effect of one panic-driven decision. I tried to compartmentalize, job duties first, emotions second. Yet each mile ticked by like a metamorphosis, folding me deeper into this event's aftermath. I pulled into the hospital lot, found a spot in the visitor parking. The lot had filled with cars now, staff and families arriving. I ducked under my open cruiser door, shoved my hands in my coat pockets and walked inside, passing pastel-painted walls, the hum of fluorescent lighting. a nurse rounding a cart of medications. Upstairs to ICU, machine beeps, soft murmurs. I signed in at the nurse's station. Officer Brady Moss, case officer. They directed me to room 12. I found Ellen's room at the end of a short hallway, a closed door with a small observation window. I knocked lightly, and a nurse inside nodded. I pushed the door open. The room was hushed. Curtains drawn at one window, a small bed cradling Ellen's frail form. She lay with an oxygen mask, IV drip, head bandaged. Her tiny chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths. A mother, Sam's birth mother, Mrs. Larson, sat next to the bed, hand on Ellen's arm, tears silently streaming. Mrs. Larson looked up, red-eyed. "Officer Moss," she said, voice trembling. "Thank you for bringing her in." I swallowed. "Ma'am, I'm glad she's stable." I knelt by her bedside. Ellen's eyelids fluttered. I saw brown curls fanned on the pillow. I said softly, "Ellen, you're safe now. You're going to be okay." She stirred, squeezed my finger, eyes bright but hazy. Mrs. Larson wrapped her arms around Ellen when she moved, whispered something to her. I watched, feeling tears burn behind my eyes. I swallowed. "Mrs. Larson, I'm so sorry," I said. "I know none of this was your fault." She shook her head. It wasn't anyone's fault. Her voice cracked. "She's my only granddaughter, and I don't know how to thank you." I looked at Ellen's pale face, oxygen mask misting slightly around her mouth. I wanted to tell Mrs. Larson how I'd chased Sam, how I realized too late that the real urgency should have been with them. But words got caught in my throat. I murmured, "She's strong. She'll pull through." Mrs. Larson nodded, wiping her eyes. "We're naming her Hope," she said, "because she's our hope." A tremor passed through me. I felt guilt so raw I could taste iron. I closed my eyes, leaned in. "I'm honored," I whispered. I watched Ellen's chest rise and fall, listened to the monitor's steady beep. I wondered how long before the family could breathe without that knot in their throat. I wondered how long before I could breathe without mine. I spent the next hour quietly in that room, talking to the nurse about care protocols, reassuring Mrs. Larson, promising updates. I placed a folded card in Mrs. Larson's hand. "Get well soon, Ellen." She nodded. Tears spilled again. I touched Ellen's hand gently. "Hang on, kid," I whispered, though I wasn't sure for whom, her or me. When I left, I glanced back at Ellen's bed, blankets tucked tight, her small chest moving in measured rhythm, head bandaged. That image, child tethered to machines, half her face hidden, etched itself into my mind. Back at the station, I found an empty hallway and leaned against the wall. My knees felt weak. I replayed the night over again, chasing Sam, blood-stained boots, that twisted creek bed. Now I saw a child suffering instead of a man running. I thought of Sam, flinching, when he lifted the kid's head, tears in his eyes. I felt his panic, his shattered dignity. I felt my own guilt for not trusting that panic would lead him to his sister instead of deeper into those woods. I trudged into the break room. Someone left a half-eaten sandwich in the fridge. I grabbed it because I couldn't stomach another donut. I sat at the table, the sandwich soggy, and chewed mechanically. A clock ticked on the wall, 10:20 a.m. I had paperwork to finish. I looked around. Officers doing traffic reports, making calls, typing statements. Normal. I envied them. I envied a routine heartbeat, a solid desk task without ghosts. I returned to my computer, reopened that supplemental report. I added the sections. 0845 hours. Officer Moss transported to Trauma 1 hospital to check on juvenile victim. Confirmed critical status, minimal brain bleed, leg surgery ongoing. 9:30 hours. Officer Moss interviewed by Detective Gardner regarding suspect's motives. Pierce admitted to dragging juvenile from vehicle, leaving juvenile to find help. 10:30 hours. Evidence delivered to DA's office. 1100 hours. Visit to hospital. Juvenile connected to life support. Family liaison provided. I typed each sentence deliberately, feeling the weight of each word. I typed until my fingers ached, then went back and edited, because every detail mattered. Each comma and semicolon carried guilt and relief. When I finally saved and printed, I fell back in my chair, head against the headrest. My eyes burned. My phone buzzed. A text from Stacy. Coffee after work? I stared at it, sighed. I typed back. Need to decompress. Might get stuck here a bit. I slid the phone aside and shut my eyes. The day stretched ahead. Interviews, hearings, maybe court schedules. Everything was moving forward. Reports filed, hospital updates, DA review, but that night would never move forward. It would cling to me, like a wet blanket that I could never dry. My door clicked open. Chief Morgan poked his head in, a crusted donut in hand. "Hey," he said, voice gentle. "You got a minute?" I blinked, wiped my eyes hastily. "Yeah." He stepped in, closed the door. "Word is, you visited the kid. Appreciate that." He handed me a donut, glazed, now looking unappetizing. I forced a smile. "Thanks." He leaned against the frame. "Moss, you did the right thing. I know it's messy. Broken girl, broken man, broken night. But your chase, your decision to stay with Sam, you kept things from getting worse." I opened my mouth, tried to say something, but could only shake my head. I swallowed. He nodded, meeting my gaze. "Come see me when you can. We need you on patrol tonight." He tapped the donut. "You look like you could use the smoke, but try not to inhale everything in sight." I closed my eyes, exhaling. When I opened them, I nodded. "I'll be back soon." He left, and I stared at the half-glazed pastry. I picked it up, took a thin bite, tasteless sugar, empty calories. I set it on a napkin. The clock on the wall read 10:57 a.m. Time was moving forward, reminders everywhere. I rose, collected my reports, and stacked them neatly in the for cheap folder. I glanced at the corridor, saw pairs of boots walking, heard phones ring, computers hum. Normalcy. I felt detached, like an observer in my own body. I walked out, the corridor's whiteness too bright, too sterile. I blotted my forehead with the back of my hand, wiped away phantom sweat. I headed for the locker room, swapped my coat for a warm jacket, night shift tonight, same route I'd taken when I encountered Sam and Ellen. I slipped on my boots, tightened the laces. I ran a brush through my hair, stared at myself in the mirror. Eyes hollow, jaw clenched, shoulders stooped. I thought of Sam's haunted face, of Ellen's fragile form, of that broken Durango against pine trunks. I thought of the forest that swallowed him up, of the creek that took her brother's life. I realized the chase never ends. It only shifts targets. Now I was chasing peace of mind, though I knew I'd never catch it. I walked outside, locking my locker, and sprinted to my cruiser in the dusk light, creeping through the windows. I slid in, started the engine, and flipped on the lights. The rumble of the engine felt like a heartbeat. I checked my radio, clear. I set the cruiser in drive, pulled out onto the service road. The sun's warmth faded behind the building, the sky turning slate gray. I turned onto Route 53 again, the empty two-lane winding ahead. My breath fogged the windshield. I aimed my headlights at the road, the pines lining either side looking like specters in the failing light. I flicked on the radio, country ballad drifting through static. I pressed the wheel, feeling every imperfection of the asphalt. I drove past mile marker 14, slowed, and stared at the shoulder where the Durango had rested. Nothing was there now, just grass flattened by the tow truck. The memory of that SUV jutting into the field came flooding back. I exhaled, closed one eye, focused on the road. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the wheel. I edged forward, listening to my tires hum on the blacktop. My mind slipped into that chase. The hiss of my tires on gravel, the crack of forest twigs underfoot, that last glimpse of Ellen's form as she faded from my mind's eye. I forced myself to focus on the next checkpoint. An abandoned diner, a gas station, a side road with a broken stop sign. I called into the mic. "This is Unit 7-5, checking in. Clear so far." My voice sounded too loud in the empty cabin. The mic clicked. I exhaled. My patrol continued, lights washing the roadside in pulses of red and blue. I scanned the woods, searching for any sign of movement, any silhouette. My breath came in shallow bursts, each exhale like a reminder. I turned onto the logging trail access, past where I angled into those woods. I slowed to a crawl, bringing the cruiser to a stop where broken fencing lined the path. I cut out the lights, killed the engine, and sat, breathing in that damp pine air. I stared at the ground, crushed needles, crushed hopes. I thought of Sam kneeling by Ellen's side, holding her head, tears in his eyes. I thought of the choice I made to chase him instead of searching for her at the Durango. I thought of the final cry from my lungs as I saw her broken body. I realized regret wasn't something you could outrun on a 2-lane road. It followed you, quiet as a whisper, persistent as a heartbeat. I closed my eyes, leaned back in the seat, and said aloud, "I'm sorry." No one answered. I sat in that dark cabin while the world beyond. My windshield moved on, dawn shifting to morning. Then I thought the only way forward was to keep moving. On patrol, on paper, in life, knowing I'd carry that night with me forever. A weight I could neither shed nor fully bear. I reached over, flipped the radio off, then cut the engine. Silence filled the cruiser, broken only by my breathing. I sat there for several minutes, letting my mind drift, then finally lifted the door handle, stepped out into the chill, and walked toward the trunk. I grabbed a fresh folder of assignments, reports to complete, interviews to schedule, court summons to deliver. As I turned to leave, I glanced back at that logging trail access, the forest beyond, silent and watchful. The morning haze hugged the treetops, sunlight just beginning to slant through the spikes of pine. I took a deep breath and walked away, leaving the night's ghosts lingering among the trees, unresolved, unforgiven, and utterly unforgettable. I closed the station door firmly behind me and trudged down the hallway toward my office, the weight of the evidence folder pressing into my arm like an accusation. The hum of the fluorescent lights above felt louder than it should, like a reminder that everyone else was carrying on with routine, ordering lunch, making coffee, talking about nothing in particular, while I was still strapped to that night's nightmare. I slid into my chair, set the folder beside my keyboard, and exhaled. For a moment, the only sound I heard was the distant hum of office printers and the occasional click of high heels on linoleum. I rubbed my face, closed my eyes, and let my head slump forward, hands gripping the edge of the desk. Pulling myself upright, I opened my email inbox to find a stack of messages, a request from victim services asking for follow-up, a reminder from the DA's office requesting digital copies of the crime scene photos, a lunch invitation from a fellow officer, Carter, asking if I was in for Sloppy Joe's at the corner grill by noon. My stomach turned. I deleted the lunch invitation. I couldn't face eating at a grill while Ellen lay in ICU. Carter's text would linger in my trash folder, but I would see it again. Maybe that would spur me to respond. I stood, retrieved my phone from my pocket and typed, "Not hungry. Thanks." I stared at the brief line for longer than necessary, then hit send. Next, I printed digital copies of the photos. Sam's footprints in mud, blood on the oak bark, that boot print in the Durango's crushed rear bumper. I watched the pages emerge, one by one, and stacked them in the folder labeled Pierce Incident. Each print felt like a shard of glass against my palm. I struggled to remember if I held my breath during the printing, or if I just went numb until the sound of the sheets hitting the output tray snapped me back to the present. I tucked the printed copies behind the folder's clear plastic cover, snapped it shut, and breathed into my shirt collar. My desk phone rang. I answered on the second ring, voice hollow. "Moss." "Officer, it's Detective Gardner," said the voice over the line. "I'm finishing up Sam's interrogation statements. Think you could stop by and review them? She's made some troubling admissions." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "I'll be there in 5. 10 at most," she replied. "I locked the door behind me. Down the hall, second door on your left." I hung up, slid out of my chair, and walked those few steps to the interrogation room. The corridor was dimmer than the main area, the carpet scent faintly of bleach. I paused at the door, straightened my uniform, and knocked lightly. "Detective?" I murmured. "Come in," Gardner said. The room's fluorescent light flickered. Sam Pierce sat at the table again, face as pale as a ghost, shackled. His eyes tracked my approach, hollow yet flickering with fear. He'd slept maybe a couple of hours. I could tell from the glassy redness behind his eyes. I swallowed, stepped inside, and shut the door behind me. The windowless room felt like a coffin. Gardner sat behind the table, her posture strict, arms folded. I took the empty chair beside Sam. Gardner slid 2 sheets of paper across to me. "Statements," she said. "Read them. Then I want to hear your account." I glanced at Sam, then at the statements. The first recounts his account of driving with Ellen sleeping in the back, drowsing at the wheel, fishtailing off Highway 53. The second recounts how he thought he'd carry her to that creek, tried to free her leg, panicked when he heard someone approaching and fled. The third blue ink statement details what he told us, how he saw that officer's lights and thought, someone safe, but then realized it was a cop and fled because he was scared he'd be blamed. Below, he wrote, "I heard the crash and thought, if he finds me, he'll call someone else." I left to find help, but I was already too late. My breath came fast. I turned to Sam. "You know one of the statements here is inconsistent." He closed his eyes, slouched. Gardner's face was unreadable. "When you first told me you were going after help," I murmured, "you said you weren't afraid of a cop. You said you thought you could outrun me, but now, here, you say you fled because of fear. Which is it?" Sam's eyes fluttered open. He looked like someone grappling with himself. I don't know," he whispered, voice cracking. "I was afraid. I thought if I stayed, I'd get busted. She would have died without help. If I went for help, I could fix it and come back. But then I saw you and it was too fast. I ran. 8 minutes passed between the crash and me finding you," I said softly. "In that 8 minutes, you let your sister die alone." His head dropped. I saw tears pool at the rim of his eyelid. Gardner sat forward, pen poised. I bit down on my lower lip. The words came out easier than I expected. He didn't directly kill her, but he knowingly abandoned an injured child. He panicked instead of thinking clearly. That line from his statements, "I didn't know she'd die. He needs to take responsibility. He saw blood pooling. He tried to help, but he chose flight first." Gardner nodded, scribbled notes. "Your perspective matters in court," she said, tone even. She turned back to Sam. "Mr. Pierce, do you understand what Sergeant Moss is saying?" Sam nodded without looking up. Gardner closed her notebook. "We're done here for now. I'll forward these statements to the DA Moss. Thanks for your insights." I rose, feeling an ache in my shoulders. Sam remained hunched, breath quiet. Gardner opened the door for me. As I walked out, I realized just how lonely these men in cuffs can be. Until you realize you're just as lonely, locked in your own guilt. Back at my desk, I opened the Victim Services email, drafted a note. Officer Moss followed up on Juvenile Pierce. Stable condition, critical care ongoing. Family notified, counsel assigned, continue to monitor. Provide updates as needed. I hit send. Then I drafted a response to the DA's office, attaching the digital photos. Attached, evidence photos for Pierce incident. Please acknowledge receipt. I sent it, leaned back, and closed my eyes. My shift changed soon. My relief would arrive in a few hours. Another officer to take over. I'd grab some form of dinner before that. Maybe a vending machine sandwich, something tasteless to keep me moving. But first, I had to finish processing statements. I found Sam's signed confession forms on my desk, scanned them, and emailed copies to legal. Each signature felt like an expiry mark on his life before prison. I printed the original confession, slid it into the case file. The interrogation room. Toussaint stared at me as I walked by. I didn't linger. Instead, I headed to evidence control and dropped off the final photo sets and sister's name depositions. The clerk recognized me, offered a cursory nod. I might have nodded back, like acknowledging we both knew how heavy this case felt. I checked the bulletin board, a schedule for next week's roll call, training sessions, a list of cars needing to go to the impound lot, a stapled flyer for a domestic violence training seminar 2 weeks from now. I stared at those poster colors, red, black, white, and felt hollow. I grabbed a marker and scribbled, "You can't fix broken," under it, as a note to myself. Then, I retraced my steps to the break room. Inside, Carter was drinking coffee and scrolling on his phone. He looked up when he saw me. "Hey, Moss," he said, lifting a hand. "You want some chili?" Sheila from dispatch dropped off a batch before she left. I shook my head. "I appreciate it, but I'm good." He nodded, understanding more than I expected. Carter was good people. He'd seen his share of bad nights, too. I grabbed a soda from the fridge, cracked it open, let the fizz fill the room. "I heard about Pierce," he said softly. "Kid's gonna live, right?" I nodded once. "Doctor says minimal brain damage, but infection could set in. He's got a long way to go." Carter set his phone down. "You okay?" I felt anger rise. Anger at Sam for running. Anger at myself for chasing. Anger at fate for letting this storyline happen. But I swallowed it. "I will be," I said, voice low. "Just need some fresh air." I stepped outside, forced myself to walk 10 paces away from the building until I reached a small break area with picnic tables. I lifted my face to the sky. Late afternoon sun filtered through drifting clouds. I breathed slow, deep. I felt the press of the breeze carrying a faint scent of pine and gasoline from the nearby gas station. A leaf drifted past my cheek. I tracked it with my eyes until it landed on the pavement. My phone buzzed. It was Lieutenant Harris. "Moss, get me your updated witness list by 6. Also, I assigned you to testify at juvenile review hearing later this afternoon. Be ready." I stared at the text, thumb hovering. I typed back, "On it." That hearing. If they decided not to release any family members, sister would remain under observation, Sam would be sent to juvenile detention until trial. My heart tightened. I could feel the echo of the night's wind in those woods still on my skin, as though I was trying to strip myself of pine needles, but they were embedded in my flesh. I headed back inside, followed the hallway to the conference room where the juvenile review board would meet. There were a dozen chairs around a long table. Social workers, a prosecutor, a public defender, someone from Child Protective Services, and 2 members of the county's juvenile court panel. I slipped into the last chair. I felt their eyes flick to me, jurors waiting on a witness. I placed my notes in front of me, typed summaries of my observations, the ambulance call sheet, a timeline from the crash to when I found Sam. The social worker introduced me, Officer Brady Moss, who responded to the scene and provided first medical aid. The prosecutor nodded, and the meeting began. They asked me to recount my actions, how I discovered the Durango, the sighting of Sam, pursuit into the woods and finding the injured child. I spoke slowly, watched their expressions lean forward, brows knit. When I described carrying Ellen uphill to the dirt road, I could see a counselor's eyes glisten with empathy. When I said Sam said, "I thought someone would find her," I saw the prosecutor scribble, "Flight versus fight," in big letters. I closed my eyes briefly to remember the exact words. "He abandoned her," I told them. He might not have meant to kill her, but his panic took priority over her survival. They asked questions. "Could you have found Ellen earlier if you hadn't chased Sam into the woods?" I paused. "Yes," I admitted. I chose to pursue Sam because child safety seat was empty. I thought he might be a kidnapping suspect. I didn't know there was a child injured until I found him. But had I called for K9 instead of running in, I might have lost more time. My chest constricted. They pressed. "Did you consider waiting for backup?" I exhaled. "Number, I considered that, but I thought, what would you do if your own kid was missing and you saw an empty seat?" I let my instincts override procedure. The panelist leaned in, peered at me. "You admit you made a mistake?" I nodded. "Yes?" My throat burned. They deliberated, whispered behind open laptops. The judge's assistant escorted me out afterward, said, "Decision will be delivered by mail. Good work." I walked back down the hall, head down, shoulders slumped. I realized I'd laid my mistake bare, exposed my flawed choices to a room full of strangers. I'd essentially handed them evidence that I was human, fallible, guilt-ridden. Yet, I suspected that was the only way to move forward. Back at my desk, I found 2 envelopes. One was a letter from Trauma 1, an interim medical update on Ellen. Stable condition, risk of infection persists, scheduled for antibiotic infusion. No sign of neurological deficit at this time. The other envelope was from the DA's office. "Thank you, Officer Moss. Await further instructions regarding testimony date." I stuffed both into my jacket pocket. I felt the paper's soft annotations, the crease where it folded. I rubbed my thumb over the word stable, surprised at how hollow it sounded. I wondered if Ellen's definition of stable was the same as mine. The clock on my computer blinked 3:45 p.m., a shift change in 15 minutes. I called dispatch. Unit 75, clear of juvenile review board. Heading home for a quick break. We'll be back to start patrol at 7 p.m. I shut down my monitor, slid into my chair, and rubbed my neck. The soreness traveled down to my shoulders, leading all the way to my calves. My uniform felt heavy, like coated armor. I rose, grabbed a fresh folder of unsolved misdemeanor reports, and placed them in my briefcase. I wore my jacket, tugged the sleeves down, and headed to the front. In the hallway, an officer kid, Sherman, passed and gave me a thumbs up. Enormously toothy grin. "Shift's morphin' into night again, huh?" he said, eyes bright. "Catch some grub before you come back?" I smiled back, half-hearted. "Got plans. Catch you later." He nodded and moved on. I realized how unnatural it felt to stand casually, converse casually, like my insides were scrambled eggs I could never fully reassemble. I stepped outside into the crisp air. The sun dipped behind clouds, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I breathed deep, felt sweat chill in my hair, felt the odor of gas from idling cruisers clinging in the air. I opened my cruiser door and slid in. I didn't start the engine. Instead, I closed my eyes, leaned back in the seat, and exhaled until my lungs emptied. I thought about the night ahead, the chance I'd have to slip back into my routine, lights scanning the roadside, radio static crackling, someone calling for backup. But I also knew I had to prepare. Tonight would be different. Tonight, I'd be carrying the weight of this tragedy. Every moment I'd be aware that at any second I could do everything right or everything wrong. I leaned in, ran my finger along the steely dashboard, and whispered, "Come on, Moss. You got this." I opened my eyes, slid the key in, and started the engine. The hum vibrated through me. With a final gulp of cold air, I flicked on the lights, turned the cruiser toward the street, and headed out. The county roads welcomed me with open blackness and only the faint glow of distant farms. From my vantage, I saw 3 possibilities ahead. Keep doing my best at my job, try to forgive myself, and hope that by tomorrow, maybe things would feel a bit less broken. Or get lost inside my regret and let it unravel me entirely. But I knew I wouldn't do that. Not yet. Instead, I pounded the wheel lightly, cracked open the windows for cold air, and repeated under my breath, "Drive. Watch. Protect." I merged onto Highway 53. The vacant fields flashed by beneath the headlights, stalks and fence posts, gravel embankments. I forced my shoulders back, remembering the feel of carrying Ellen uphill, watching Sam's eyes crumple as he realized his guilt. That memory cut deeper than any blade, but maybe it also reminded me why I became a cop. To be there when people couldn't be there for themselves. To run toward the darkness instead of running away. The road stretched ahead, dotted with mile markers. I passed mile 11, 12, 13, treading ground that felt poisonous, like stepping on someone else's corpse. At mile 14, the site where the Durango had rested, I kept pushing forward instead of stopping. No need to reawaken that visual. I drove on. I reached the diner at mile 15, a flickering neon sign. Edna's Diner, open 24 hours. The windows glowed warm, fried breakfasts in midlife crisis. But I didn't stop. I needed solitude more than pancakes. I crept past, closed the diner in my headlights. At the underpass near mile 17, I slowed, listening for echoes. A train horn, a coyote's howl. Nothing. I felt something raw rise inside me. The memory of chasing footsteps, that frantic pursuit. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. I whispered to the empty car, "You gotta let it go." But I knew I wouldn't, not tonight. I'd drive this road again and again, footsteps of fear at my heels, until I learned how to live with the cost of that chase. As I exited the underpass, I saw my cruise radar reflect a sign. Caution, wildlife crossing. I thought of Ellen, of Sam, of the disfigured oak, of the long haul uphill. I thought of every little decision, each second I paused, each doorway I passed. I realized there were no second chances for that night, just a lifetime of reckoning. I flipped on the dashboard camera, documenting it all, mounted my flashlight, and pressed forward into the thickening darkness, ready to dive again, to keep running headlong toward whatever came next. There was no letting go, no reset button, only the slow pulse of headlights, the low hum of the cruiser's engine, and the indefinable echo of that little girl's grip on my finger as she drifted uncertain between life and death. Tonight, I drove into that dark again, because the chase never truly ends. It merely shifts into paperwork, into hospitals, into courtrooms, and then back onto the roads where every mile marker is a reminder that even when daylight comes, the night still lives on in each of us, waiting. And I know I'll answer its call every time. The cruiser's engine thrummed beneath me as I eased out of the diner parking lot, the last strip of daylight succumbing to the darkness beyond the pines. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 7:02 p.m., and flexed my shoulders, feeling every ache from my desk-bound shift catch up to me. Across the radio, dispatch crackled with routine. Unit 7-8, 10-50 at the intersection of Highway 53 and County Road 12. Possible fender bender, units en route. I keyed back. 7-5 en route, 10-4, though I had no intention of diverting. This night was mine to own, to drive every mile and keep the ghosts at bay, at least until the sun rose again. I accelerated onto the two-lane stretch of Route 53, the empty road in front of me illuminated only by my headlights. The smell of pine sap and mud clung to the glass, and I cracked the window slightly to let in a cold breeze. The air felt sharp, like it would slice right through to my lungs. Somewhere to my left, a distant train horn sounded, a low, mournful call that echoed into the night. I felt a pull in my chest, a reminder of how small we all are beneath that vast sky. I pushed the horn to the curve where the Durango had veered months ago and kept moving, steady on the gas. I scanned the roadside, the jagged silhouette of an abandoned farmhouse to my right, a single window dark and empty. I thought of Sam's breathing when I carried Ellen up that steep logging trail. That moment when the full weight of what he'd done squashed him. I adjusted my seat, rubbing my palms on my trousers to stave off the tingle of unease. Behind me, nothing but a wake of headlights, and I felt an uneasy satisfaction knowing I was alone with my thoughts. At mile marker 16, a flash of movement caught my eye. Something small, darting into the field. Deer, probably. I jinked my wheels slightly, careful not to overcorrect on the wet asphalt. My heart thumped. Around here, deer collisions ran high in the fall, and I'd seen more than one cruiser dented from striking a doe. The radio sputtered. Unit 7-3, chasing a possible shoplifter near Main Street. I acknowledged 7-5 copy, and let the static fill the quiet. A mile later, I turned onto County Road 11, a narrower, poorly maintained gravel road that curved through dense pines. The gravel sprayed beneath my tires like confetti. I flicked on the fog lights to cut through increasing gloom, then dialed my flashlight to strobe mode and turned off all other lights, driving as stealthily as I could. My goal: run the primary patrol loop I used to do when I first started night shift. Cornwell Road, the old logging trail access, the dirt turnaround near the creek bed, then back to Highway 53. Each segment carried its own memory of the Pierce case. Before cresting the hill onto Cornwell, I reached across the console, snatched the radio mic, and spoke. Dispatch, this is Unit 7-5. I'm checking the normal PRL. I'll be passing through Cornwell in 2. PRL, Primary Response Loop, was a term we used to make sure the dispatcher knew who was where during the dead hours. I keyed set before hearing a response. It never came. The only reply was the hum of static. Turning onto Cornwell Road, the canopy of oaks arched over me, their leaves rustling like hushed voices. I drove at 10 miles per hour, careful not to spook anything. Shadows danced across the hood. My heartbeat matched the thrum of the engine. I made the first turn past an old blue mailbox with a white 37 painted on the side. That mailbox belonged to the Atwood place, the one with the dead shed full of scrap metal and seasonal deer stands. I scanned the driveway lights. None were on. The gravel driveway dipped into darkness. At the next bend, I saw the faint glow of farmhouse porch lights in the distance, and I slowed even more, out of habit. Back when I was a rookie, I'd knock on doors at night to check on households, especially after 9 p.m. Now, I knew most folks slept too hard to care. Still, I clicked on my spotlight and swept the beams across windows just to be sure. All dark, all empty. I winced at the silence, the emptiness, how it pressed on me like a weight. My mind wandered to Sam's form on that cinder block floor in the warehouse, kneeling and trembling. I breathed in slow, gather data, observe, proceed. In theory, policing was about logic, routines, facts. Tonight, it felt like each fact carved me deeper. Facts like a child's bone fragments and a fractured skull. A man's hysteria in the woods. I recalled how dispatch had called me 7-5, not Officer Moss, when I first called for backup. That impersonal tag still felt like a slap, as if they were calling me something other than human. I reached the old logging trail access, where a rusted gate barred the path. Though back then, I'd scaled the gate instead of driving past. I flipped on my interior light to check the time. 7:27 p.m. I killed the engine, listened. Nothing but the thrumming of my radio's power pack and a distant owl's hoot. I flicked off the interior light, gripped the wheel, and watched the empty silhouette of the forest beyond. I eased forward, coasting into the dirt track. My tires crunched, spitting pebbles. I hovered at 10 miles per hour, scanning left and right, the stomach of my cruiser staining itself with muddy earth. I saw a cluster of broken fencing posts a few dozen yards down, a narrow game trail through ferns that I'd followed on foot once, hoping to corner Sam. He'd circled around me, though, crawling on his knees and leaving backtracking footprints. I chased until my lungs burned, until I found Ellen bleeding, and I knew I'd never forget that sight. Her hair matted with dirt, eyes closed, the faint gasp of breath. I kept driving slowly, feeling the trail ripple under me. The moon was a sliver now, barely illuminating the forest. I flicked my light onto high beam for a second, caught a flash of a doe's eye turn at the trail's edge, and recoiled. I killed the beam, didn't want to scare her. In fact, I didn't want to see anything. But I had to. I had to face it again and again until the trembling subsided. The trail narrowed further and I had to stop to turn around. I set the car in park, shut off the lights, and let the night settle. I listened for rustling. None. I watched the black expanse beyond the windshield, fingers tapping on the steering wheel. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and stepped out. Gravel shifted beneath my boots. Frost glistened on blades of grass. The air hit my face like ice. I swung the beam around, panned across the trees. My lungs seized when I thought I heard a twig snap, stopped breathing, hand tightening on the light. But nothing. No movement, only swirling shadows. I exhaled and clicked off the flashlight. I decided to walk 10 paces into the woods, just enough to feel that primal edge of fear, that gut-wrenching awareness that everything could be beneath the undergrowth. I slipped between two pines, shone the light along a low branch. water droplets clung like morning dew, even though it was nearly 8 p.m. The ground was uneven. I felt my boots slip on mud. I tugged on my holster, hand settled over its grip, ready. A breeze stirred the forest. I heard leaves sigh. I paused, feeling my breath warm my collarbone. I raised my light, sweeping it side to side. Everything looked the same: fern, bramble, black shadows, deeper shadow. I searched for the human shape, the movement, the sound. But there was nothing. I took a step back, reached for the cruiser door and climbed in, slamming it shut. The engine roared to life and I leaned back, letting the heater warm my hands. I set the light to steady and flicked on the low beams, turning the car around to face back toward the county road. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I exhaled slowly. My pulse thudded in my throat, and I rocked back in my seat. Finally, I opened the door, got back in and eased forward, dust and gravel swirling behind. I felt, if only for a moment, like I was drowning inside my own mind. That forest would never be neutral again. It would always be the scene of Abel's last minutes, Ellen's last moments of consciousness, Sam's ultimate failure. I drove back onto Cornwell Road, hitting the gravel so hard that my steering wheel vibrated like a tuning fork. I flicked on my strobe lights just to leave a mark. No other cars would come this way at night, but I wanted something solid in the darkness. My shadow loomed across the dashboard, arms tense, face a rigid mask. I shifted my grip to the wheel and drove until I saw the faint glow of Highway 53's signs in the distance. The roar of my engine changed tone as I passed under the streetlight, and for a moment I felt weightless. Just a car moving through darkness, not a man burdened by grief and guilt. At the intersection, I turned north again, heading toward the next checkpoint. That dilapidated gas station where 3 months ago, the attendant told me he saw a kid dragging a little girl up a hill. I kept my lights off until I crested the hill, then clicked on the headlights to avoid a collision. The station sat silent, lights off, pumps idle. I parked 20 feet back, killed the engine, and listened. The hum of the highway was distant, but I heard the click of my own seatbelt release. I grabbed my flashlight, walked to the edge of the pavement, and peered at the cracked concrete. I recalled that attendant's confession, how he almost called 911 when he saw someone screaming for help, then thought it was kids fooling around, until he heard the second scream, a more panicked, blood-curdling shriek. He'd been too late. Only fresh tracks in the dirt, no bodies, just the echo of anguished breaths. I reached down, ran my light over the ground, no clues, no blood, no sign. Nothing but broken pavement and a battered trash can beside the pump. I thought for a second I saw a smear on the concrete, rain or coffee stain, but my stomach twisted. I turned back to the cruiser and got in. I taped the flashlight to my belt. Then, as I oriented the car to leave, I saw something skim across my windshield. A small twig, blown by a breeze. My heart shot into my throat. I exhaled, brushing my hand over my chest, feeling its rapid beat. I closed my eyes for a half-second, remembering the whisper of Ellen's final breath, soft as a ghost. I exhaled and flicked on the lights, backing out of the station onto the main road, heading west. The hum of the engine settled into my ears like a mantra. Move. Don't stop. Keep going. Each checkpoint felt like a gauntlet I had to pass to prove I could endure. I passed the railroad underpass again, lights off. Engine idling on that section felt like trespassing an open grave. I didn't dare stop. I kept driving, hand resting on the steering wheel's rim, a silent vow that I would keep moving, keep patrolling, keep my eyes open. Around 8:15 p.m., a call came in. Unit 7-2. Report of suspicious person by the abandoned mill on County Road 9. I idled my tires beside the diner entrance and shoved the car into drive. 7-5 en route, I replied, my voice steady. Though I didn't expect to find any new horrors there, I couldn't resist the pull. It gave me a mission, a purpose. I followed the dotted lines of Route 53 until I hit the turnoff, my tires grinding as I turned onto the mill road. The abandoned mill's silhouette loomed ahead. Rusted metal siding, shattered windows with nothing but darkness behind them. I parked across the street, killed the lights, clicked my flashlight on and stepped out. The night air was brittle. The smell of rot and damp bricks smacked my nostrils. I treaded carefully across gravel littered with shards of glass. My boots crunched and my flashlight beam wavered, catching the edge of a broken door frame. I whispered into my radio, 7-5 at abandoned mill, checking for suspects. No response. I walked toward the main entrance, heavy steel doors coated in peeling paint. I knocked lightly against the rusted metal, expecting no reply. Silence. I swept the light inside, a cavernous space of steel beams, broken machinery, and crates splintered into kindling. The windows were hollow eyes. My breath echoed. I took a tentative step forward. A sudden rustle above me made me jerk. I raised my light and saw a tattered black cat dart overhead, landing on a raised catwalk and disappearing into shadow. I exhaled a laugh. Deer and cats, more likely than human prowlers. But my pulse still hammered. I circled the main floor, light sweeping across conveyor belts and rusted pulleys, brushing against graffiti scrawled in spray paint. Stay away, and we saw you watching. Eerie, but probably kids from town, I stepped around an overturned desk, a crime scene once set for a trespass, but now it was only scattered papers damp with moisture. I swept my light higher. I saw the dark lines of stair rails leading to a second floor. I flicked off the light, listened. Nothing but my own breathing, faint hum of distant electricity. I clicked the beam back on and eased up the metal stairs. Each step creaked under my boots. Up above, all I saw were more broken windows, beams rotting in the moonlight. I took it all in, breathing shallow. No one here, no new mysteries, just abandoned machinery and the wind whistling through cracks in the siding. I walked back out, stepping onto the gravel, and felt a pang of relief that no one was here to harm tonight. I thought of Ellen in her hospital bed, safe for now, and of Sam in the juvenile center, probably pacing a cell. I realized running after phantom suspects in empty buildings wouldn't fix anything. But still, I had to do it. I had to keep patrolling, keep searching, keep scanning shadows, because sometimes finding nothing was as important as finding something. I climbed back into the cruiser, doors slamming a final note. I started the engine, killed the ground beneath me. I flicked on my lights, turned west again, heading for the gas station off County Road 7. Report of a domestic disturbance there. The dispatcher's voice crackled. 7-5. Vehicle still needed at domestic on County 7. Suspect male, possible disorderly. Residents say he's been banging on doors. I responded. 7-5 en route. As I drove away, the abandoned mill slid into darkness behind me. The road narrowed, pine trees pressed closer, and I sank deeper into my seat. Each turn of the wheel took me further from the Pierce case's epicenter, but I knew that in my mind they'd never be separate. That abandoned mill was just one checkpoint in the long route I'd drive until I understood what it meant to be a cop who failed once. How to forgive myself. How to face every new call without flinching. How to protect the next Ellen with everything I had left of my courage. My cruiser's headlights cut through the night, guiding me toward the next call, where I'd step out into another house's doorway, another frightened family, another story that might break me or make me whole again. With each mile, I reminded myself, I was here to serve, to stand in that darkness so others could find a spark of light, even if that light flickered in me, perpetually dim, forever altered by the night I chased a broken man into the woods and found a broken child instead. I can't remember exactly when I first noticed the headlights flicker, maybe halfway down that gravel side road, where the moonlight barely touched the earth. I was driving with the cruiser's spotlight off, listening to the radio chatter and sipping lukewarm coffee from the styrofoam cup in my hand, trying to keep my eyes on that long stretch of blacktop ahead. It was the kind of night that felt too quiet. The hum of the engine, the distant chirp of crickets, the soft rustle of leaves in the tow-headed breeze. I'd already been on shift for 6 hours, 2 more to go, and I was tired enough that I nearly missed the sedan until it fishtailed into view. It happened fast. 1 second, nothing. The next, headlights bouncing ahead of me like startled deer. I slammed my cup down into the cup holder and flicked on the overhead lights. They bathed the road in blue and red, painting the trees in a strobe of frantic color. That glare burned through the broken center lines and bounced off the crumpled metal of the sedan's front bumper. It looked as if someone had backed into a mailbox, or maybe scraped a guardrail. There was no steady flow of traffic, no tailgaters. Just that one car, weaving in and out of its lane, staggering like a drunken boxer. My gut punched me in the stomach. I radioed a quick beep. Unit Delta 6, I've got the suspect on Route 213, heading eastbound. Possible DUI or worse. The static hissed back before the dispatcher responded. Voice clipped. Copy. Proceed. I floored the accelerator. My cruiser rumbled, straining to catch up. The sedan's taillights were a smeared red smear, like the glow of embers drifting across pavement. I drifted closer, tapping my horn twice. It flared upstream, a warning, a request, a hail in the looming darkness. No brake lights, no turn signals, just reckless momentum. The night air hit my face when I rolled down the window, and I could smell the faint bitter bite of exhaust mixed with something else, something metallic. I leaned forward, peering into the sedan's driver's window. It was tinted so dark that I could barely see the driver's silhouette. But I caught a flash. A hand trembling on the wheel, knuckles white. The other hand rested on the shifter. There was movement in the back seat, something shifting, groaning softly, but I couldn't be sure. I called over the PA. Driver, this is the Millhaven County Sheriff's Office. Pull over to the right shoulder. The words felt too formal in the quiet night, hitting my ears like they belonged to someone else. He didn't slow. He shifted up another notch. I felt that tightening coil in my chest, the one that tells me the situation is about to spiral. I radioed back up. Delta 6 to all units. Suspect refusing to stop. Heading eastbound. No other vehicles in immediate vicinity. Possible kidnapping. Cameras offline. The phrase, possible kidnapping, echoed through my mind. I thought I heard it wrong at first because the original call had been about a possible DUI. But something changed. Someone identified the driver as a wanted felon. Kidnapping. The words felt like a brick dropped into my gut. Behind me, I could hear the low drone of an approaching unit, Delta 3, catching up with me, lights flaring. Delta 9 peeled off from its assigned grid and converged behind Delta 3. We boxed him in like sharks circled prey, but he didn't slow. He punched the gas. As we neared a dimly lit underpass, I flicked the spotlight onto the driver's side window. The beam carved through darkness, revealing his face, lean, angular, shadowed. a guy in his mid-20s, eyes wild, darting toward the entrance of the underpass as if he coveted the dark like a shield. I hit the siren again, long, keening, and the echo of it ricocheted off the concrete walls. Then he turned off onto a side street just before the underpass, Old Millhaven Road. Nobody else drove that road after midnight unless they worked the 24-hour gas station at the end of it. The pavement narrowed to 2 lanes, shoulder faded into weeds, no streetlights. For a second, I hesitated. No streetlights meant we'd be in near total darkness, save for our headlights. But protocol was clear. We needed to stop him. I rammed the cruiser into drive, and I followed him into that black corridor. Gravel snapped under my tires, and every leaf along the side of the road seemed to ripple under the spotlight. I tapped the horn again as he rounded the bend. I thought, maybe he'll realize we aren't messing around, throw the car into park, surrender. But instead, his sedan fishtailed once, twice, and spun out onto a muddy patch beside an old grain silo. It came to a halt with the rear end tucked into a low embankment. The engine idled, producing a dull thrum. He must have hit something, smashed a side mirror, scraped the bumper. I caught the smell of cigarette smoke drifting from the open driver's window. He was still in the car. He hadn't thrown anyone from the passenger seat. No hostage tied up or slumped in the back. The inside was empty. I coasted up behind him, shutting off my siren, killing the spotlight. I let the brakes catch my cruiser until it sat a few feet behind his. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. My mind raced through protocols. Call for EMS, get him out of the car, scan for weapons, check the back seat, check the trunk. But something in me hesitated. It was that moment, just before I swung the door open, when I noticed the tiny pair of shoes lying beside the open front door. Pink sneakers, scuffed, damp with mud. Next to the shoes, a girl's backpack. I squinted. The straps looked so small, meant for a child, maybe 6 or 7. The backpack's zipper was shut, but I could see a floral-patterned lunchbox drooping out of one side pocket. A stuffed unicorn keychain dangled from the zipper. My radio crackled. Delta 6, suspect is still in vehicle. No response to PA instructions. My partner's voice, Delta 3, added, "We have no sign of a child." My jaw clenched. If that was her backpack, then she was missing. Inside the car or somewhere behind the silo. I reached for my door handle, hand shaking. I drew my weapon, flicked it into low ready. My flashlight rested in my other hand, beam scanning the inside of the car. The windows were tinted too dark to see much, but I caught a flash of movement under the driver's seat, like a foot shifting. I shouted through my bullhorn, "Driver! Exit the vehicle with your hands visible." Silence, save for the engine's steady hum. Then a muffled whimper from behind the car. I pivoted my flashlight beam past the rear bumper, into the tall grass. There, half hidden, was the child. She crouched behind the left rear tire, knees hugged to her chin, large brown eyes glistening in the beam. Her jacket was torn and smeared with dirt. She trembled, head bowed, like she was trying to disappear into the earth. "Miss, are you okay?" My voice cracked with a desperation I didn't expect. I locked eyes with the girl. She flinched, scrunched lower, shook her head. I heard the engine shut off. The driver must have mustered the sense to kill it and slip out on foot. I holstered the weapon, but kept my finger on the trigger guard. I sprinted toward her, each step kicking up wet grass. My boots sank into the mud. She cried then, soft at first, but it broke into cries that turned her body into shaking ragdoll. I crouched beside her, keeping my light pointed at the driver's side door, just in case. I reached out with a gloved hand, gently resting it on her shoulder. She recoiled, burying her face into her knees. Her sobs came in gasps like she was drowning. "Hey," I said quietly. "It's okay. I'm here to help. You're safe now." She didn't move. I noticed then, dried blood caked under her fingernails, crusted around her hairline. Cuts on her knees. The back of her jacket was wet, like she'd been dragged. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Can you tell me your name?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Over my shoulder, I heard Delta 3 and Delta 9 scanning the tree line with their flashlights. The call had triggered a mini manhunt. Units were converging, but somehow he'd vanished. She looked up then, through tear-streaked cheeks. I saw her eyes, glass pools of terror. I felt my chest cave in. "Katie," she croaked. "Katie," I repeated. "Katie, you're safe." My partner appeared behind me, Delta 3, his flashlight painting me in harsh light. He knelt, turned his light on the girl, and gently draped a thermal blanket around her shoulders. She shook, went limp against him. I glanced toward the sedan. Its trunk was still closed. If she came out from there, then he'd laid her in the back seat. That meant he was still out there, walking in the woods. Somewhere. I slid my hand into my pocket, found my phone, keyed in a number. "Dispatch. Send EMS to Millhaven Road at the silo immediately. We have a juvenile victim, likely abducted, possible trauma. Over." I knelt beside Katie, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "You don't have to be afraid. We've got you." She closed her eyes, turned her face into my shoulder. I felt warm tears seep into my uniform. I heard Delta 3's radio call. "Units. Suspect sighting in tree line, half-mile north. Suspect described as male, mid-20s, hoodie, fleeing on foot." I rose, holstered my weapon, and pointed toward the woods. "Let me help with that." I felt every eye on me, officer, dispatcher, even Katie's. I swallowed another knot of fear. I thought, I have to find him. I can't let this happen again. My boots crunched as I crossed that muddy patch toward the tree line. The forest swallowed me. The trees loomed, rigid and silent. My flashlight beam bounced off gnarled roots and broken branches. I called out, "Police! Stop now!" My voice echoed hollow. No response, just the night, breathing around me. Suddenly, I heard it. A twig snap off to the left. I flicked the flashlight that way, caught a glimpse of a shadow darting behind an oak. Without thinking, I sprinted toward it, heart pounding so loud I swear I heard it in my ears. The beam caught a glimpse of him for a split second. Hoodie, face obscured, hands stuffed into pockets. He moved like a ghost through the brush. I chased him deeper, following the rustle, the crack of leaves underfoot. My breath came in ragged bursts. I cursed myself. Why didn't I call for canine units? I'd been so sure he'd circle back, try to hide. He was prepared. He knew these woods. The forest closed in, tight like a tunnel. The beam of my flashlight trembled in my grip. I tried to steady it, focus on the ground to avoid tripping. I felt roots twisting under my boots. Something snagged at my pant leg. Thorns. I yanked free, cursed. Then I heard him. His voice, soft but close like a whisper behind my ear. "Found you." It froze me, blood draining. I turned, aimed my light at where I thought he'd stand. Nothing. Then another snap. Branches brushing. I whirled again, but still nothing. My heart pounded so fast I thought it'd burst. I raised my voice almost frantically. "Stop! Show yourself!" He stepped into the beam then, just beyond the radius, hood pulled low, face shrouded. He held something in his right hand. A cell phone. Its screen glowed, illuminating his features just enough. I saw the scar first. Thin, pale, slicing from his eyebrow across his cheek, like a lightning bolt frozen in flesh. Then I saw his eyes, dark hollows, pupils dilated, emotionless but cold as ice. I stared, gun raised, finger on the trigger guard. Drop the phone. Put your hands where I can see them. He smiled, bitter and slow, then clicked the phone upright. The screen faced me. My stomach lurched as I saw the image. Katie, asleep in her bed, tucked under a pink comforter. Photos of her stuffed animals lined the nightstand. Whatever evidence he'd taken from her room before the abduction. She was safe, unaware of the nightmare that awaited. He lowered the phone. "Your girl's safe right now," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled, but she won't stay safe for long. My breath caught. "Let her go, Reagan." I used his last name, hoping to remind him I knew who he was. It meant maybe something, maybe it would break the spell. But he laughed, soft and mirthless. "Officer Reynolds," he said. He spat that name in the air like a curse. 5 years ago, you saved her. You saved me too, or at least you tried. But you didn't save our family, you took her away. My mind scrambled. I tried to recall. Reagan. His name sounded like regret, spelled wrong. I remembered a family hostage callback when I was fresh on the force. A teen had held his little sister at gunpoint in their living room. I'd shot the gun out of his hand. He'd collapsed, sobbing. His sister, Katie, had crawled into my arms, crying. She'd lost her mother in a car accident last year. The brothers were the only family left. I remembered it all, but I'd never thought of them again. He took a step closer, pulling the phone into his chest like a talisman. Katie kept calling for you in her sleep. She woke up screaming, her breath fogging the sheets. She said, "Daddy's coming." So I had to bring her back to you. My vision blurred, my heart twisted into knots. I did what I had to do. You were unstable. The court ordered treatment for 5 years. You got help. You checked out. You were released 3 months ago. He shook his head. I was healed. They said I was stable. But you can't keep a sister from a brother forever. His voice cracked. You can't. His phone screen dimmed. Why, I couldn't tell. He raised his gaze to me, sweat shining on his brow. His hands trembled around the device. He inhaled, exhaled, like he was about to launch into violence. I tightened my grip on the gun, knuckles white. "Reagan," I said, my voice soft but resolute. "Put the phone down, let her go." He closed his eyes, scowling. The forest around us felt suffocating, as if it leaned in to listen. The only sounds were my shallow breathing and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. He opened his eyes that seemed ancient, full of pain. Then he dropped the phone. It hit the ground with a dull thud, skittered across leaves. I exhaled. He didn't run or lunge. He just stood there, feet planted, chest heaving. I tried to calm my racing thoughts. "We'll get you help again," I told him, edging a step closer. "We'll make sure Katie's safe. That's my promise." He raised his hand, unarmed, empty, and rested it on his chest, over his heart. "I know," he whispered. "You kept your promise back then, but this promise..." He looked past me, down a makeshift path. I had to see it through, even if it broke me. I knelt, reaching for my cuffs, but when I glared at him, as if to force him to abide, his eyes softened. He didn't look like a suspect anymore, just a boy who never felt safe after losing his mother. I saw tears welled in his eyes. He closed them and let them fall, like a dam finally cracking. My thoughts spun. I should arrest him now. Legally, he'd taken kidnapping, trespassing, assault, the list goes on. But something in me just ached, maybe empathy or guilt. I lowered my gun. "All right," I said. Let's walk back to the sedan, get Katie, get you both help." He nodded once. We moved together, careful not to trip over tangled roots. But as we reached the edge of the tree line, a single beam of moonlight shone through clouds onto the grain silo. The metal walls looked slick, ominous. I realized then, if he'd wanted, he would've used my own gun to shoot me. He stood close enough to do it. I exhaled, letting the tension leave my shoulders. "Katie," I said, scanning ahead. "She's waiting." But when we rounded the corner, the sedan was gone. The girl was gone. The seat was empty. Blood from an earlier cut had soaked the back seat's upholstery. I sank to my knees inside the door frame, fist hitting the roof in disbelief. Reagan stared at me then, face unreadable. "She wouldn't have come out," he said quietly. "She knows where she belongs." I shook my head, blinking. "No, she trusts us." My voice sounded hollow. He sighed, snapped something in his hand, a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it, revealing writing in a child's scrawl. "Find me where memories fade." My chest constricted. I looked up at him, but he didn't meet my gaze. Instead, he slipped the note into his pocket. Before I could move, he backed away into the darkness, swallowed by the forest's edge, until he was no more than a silhouette. I jumped up, scanned the tree line, but he was gone. I pounded my fist into my palm. My radio crackled with dispatch, demanding status updates. I dragged my gaze back to the empty asphalt. The silence felt oppressive, like the night itself had swallowed 2 lives. I sank to the ground, knees pressed against the cold pavement. I closed my eyes, trying to force the image of Katie's terrified face to fade, but I couldn't. And that note, "Find me where memories fade," burned into my mind like a brand. The wheels of my cruiser hummed as it idled behind me. I knew I should grab that little backpack, collect evidence, secure the scene, call in more units. But I just watched the horizon, where the moon peered through the clouds and bathed the world in pale silver. And as I sat there, listening to the distant call of an owl, I realized the chase had never ended. It had only paused. My boots dug into the gravel and I rose, voice barely a whisper. "Find me where memories fade." I heard that silence resume. He was gone, she was gone, and I was still here, left with only the echo of my failure. The moonlight shifted, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw her standing at the edge of the forest. Katie, face tear-streaked, clutching her unicorn keychain. But when I blinked, she was gone too. And in that stillness, I knew there was no going back. I shoved my hands into my pockets, feeling the crumpled edges of that note before I dropped it back to the asphalt. My knees scraped against the gravel when I sat down again, staring at the empty stretch where the sedan had vanished. My radio crackled to life, a demand for my status, concerned voices asking if I was all right. I let the microphone rest on my lap, didn't respond. The dispatcher's worry filtered through the noise but felt distant, like a half-remembered dream. I didn't answer because I wasn't all right, not by a long shot. My head throbbed, each pulse echoing in my temples. The wind whispered through the treetops, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I traced my fingers over the edges of the note in my mind. "Find me where memories fade." The letters danced before my eyes, scrawled in a child's careful hand. It was an invitation, or maybe a demand, I couldn't tell. But I knew it was meant for me, not just because Reagan had known exactly where to lead me, but because it tapped into something darker, a place in me I'd long buried. Slowly, I rose to my feet. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to stand. I walked toward my cruiser, boots crunching on the gravel. I noticed the faint shimmer of red under the silo where I'd parked, and realized how absurd it was that I'd forgotten to collect that backpack. Those tiny shoes. Evidence abandoned in my own haste. I opened the door and clicked on the overhead lights just long enough to collect what I'd missed. The backpack was damp, mud smeared across the floral fabric, and the shoes were caked in dirt. I shoved them into an evidence bag, sealed it, then tossed it onto the passenger seat. I stared at the open road. The grain silo covered more ground than I'd thought. Its corrugated metal walls rose like a silent colossus in the moonlight. I couldn't shake the image of Katie's face. Eyes wide, cheeks wet, hand pressed against my chest as if holding onto a lifeline. And Reagan's face. The hollowed eyes, the scar, the despair etched so deeply that he looked older than his years. I stumbled back to the cruiser, hand pressed to my side where my heart lodged in my throat. I finally keyed the microphone. Delta 6 to dispatch. I need at least 2 more units, canine preferably. The suspect is still at large. Juvenile victim transported to County General. I'm staying at Millhaven Road, near Silo. Do not call off search. My voice sounded brittle, but the words tasted like ash in my mouth. Back at the driver's seat, I sat for a moment, staring through the windshield at the tree line. I tapped the radio again. Delta 3, status update? Delta 3 responded, canine unit en route. We're coordinating with ground units. All roads out of Millhaven Road are covered. We're setting up a perimeter. I nodded, even though he couldn't see. I glanced back to where Reagan had vanished. That spot, the treeless break in the forest, gnawed at me. I felt the tug of duty. I would go after him again, push further into those woods where the only guide was my own guilt, and the whisper of a brother desperate to find his sister. I started the engine and pulled out onto the road, rolling toward the belt of pines. The forest swallowed the cruiser almost instantly. The only light came from my headlights, painting twisted shadows across the trunks. I kept my speed under 20 miles per hour, ears straining for any snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. At times, I'd catch a glint, daylight reflection on a branch, but it was never Reagan. Each flash triggered a jolt of adrenaline that left me gasping, hands tightening on the steering wheel. After a quarter mile, I saw fresh footprints in the mud at the edge of the ford. 1 set, 2 sets of treads pressed side by side. The deeper imprints belonged to a kid's small sneakers. Next to them, a set of larger, heavier prints, Reagan's boots. They led into the forest, winding between pines until they vanished into gloom. I killed the engine and grabbed my gear, flashlight, sidearm, cuffs, radio clipped to my belt, backup magazine. I stepped onto the spongy earth, careful not to spook any wildlife. My flashlight beam revealed broken branches, evidence of a kid's panic, breaking whatever small saplings got in her way. I crouched, followed the scuffed trail for a few feet, but then it suddenly stopped. No footprints. The leaf litter had swallowed them. It felt like I lost them in an instant, the trail devoured by darkness. I keyed the mic. Delta 6 has suspect footprints leading into northwest quadrant, about 50 yards from the silo, beginning grid search on foot. Copy, Delta 6, dispatcher replied. Protocol. Stay in contact, maintain radio silence when possible. We have overhead drones scanning. ETA K9 unit, 5 minutes. My heart thrummed. I clicked off the radio and plunged into the woods. My flashlight danced across roots and gnarled bark. The canopy muffled the world above, and only the beam pierced this silent cavern. The breeze rustled leaves, but I felt a heavier presence, like the trees themselves watched me. My boots sank into soft mud. Every so often, I'd catch scent of damp pine and rot, but beneath that, something acrid, like burnt metal. It made my stomach drop. I followed the direction where the tracks had pointed. Branches scratched my face as I ducked under low limbs. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, but only barely. Sweat beaded along my hairline as I pressed deeper. The friendlier forest of my childhood memories. Camping, hunters in camouflage, the rustle of squirrels, had transformed into an alien landscape. Each step felt like trespassing into someone's nightmares. Then I heard it, soft sobbing, barely audible, like the echo of a ghost. My heart lurched. I stopped, pressed my hand to my ear. There it was again, sobbing, cracking, and then a child's whisper, "Officer, help me." I stumbled toward the sound, tripping on exposed roots until I caught myself on a bent sapling. My flashlight filled the beam with dust motes and I raised it higher, revealing a small clearing. There, seated on the damp forest floor, shivering in a thin jacket and pajama pants, was Katie. Her mascara had run, streaked her cheeks. Her lips quivered as she trembled. She hugged her knees to her chest. "Katie," I whispered, dropping to one knee. I kept my gun holstered. She needed comfort, not fear. "It's me." She looked up, eyes hollow, pupils dilated. She flinched as though I'd struck her. When she saw my badge, her expression flickered. Fear, relief, confusion. She crawled back a few feet, still hugging her knees. "Don't come any closer," she said, voice hoarse. My heart went tight. I pulled out my radio, quietly. "Delta 6 to Canine Unit. Suspect may be near child's location. Hold back." Canine confirmed. I turned my attention back to her. "They've got a perimeter set up. You're safe. But we need to get you out of here." She shook her head. "He's out there. He's still watching." I shone my light toward the deeper woods. A silhouette flickered. Two, one tall, one shorter, vanished behind a tree before I could identify them. My pulse pounded. "Katie, can you stand?" I offered my hand. She didn't respond. Her eyes shifted to the direction where I'd seen movement. I crouched lower, trying to calm her. "He's not going to hurt you now, I promise, but we need to move." A twig snapped to my left. I swung the beam around. Reagan stepped out from behind a maple. Shoulders hunched, face obscured by a hood, hands hidden in pockets. Behind him was a second figure, a teenager, bruised, maybe 14, with tangled hair and clothes too large for her frame. I bolted to my feet, drawing my weapon until the beam fell on her. The kid's eyes widened when she recognized me. "Officer Reynolds," she whispered. She was not Katie. Her face was younger, stunned. Reagan took a cautious step forward. "Stay back," I warned him, voice low. He shook his head slowly. "She's not Katie, she's Leah, Katie's friend. I had to bring her so Katie could remember." My blood chilled. I swept the beam to Leah. She sobbed silently, clutching a tattered doll, a clown with half its face missing. It reminded me of the unicorn keychain, regurgitated memories in the hands of a child. "Reagan, let Leah go," I said. He locked eyes with me, eyes full of despair. "I will, but first, I need her to understand why I'm doing this." He gestured to the spot where Katie sat. Her small frame was rigid, unmoving, staring at the ground. "She remembers when I left." I swallowed. "You did what you had to do. The court said you were stable. You got help for 5 years. He laughed then, a dry, rattling sound. "Help? That wasn't help. That was just waiting. I waited to be free, but I wasn't free." He took a step toward me, but kept his hands tucked into his coat. My grip on the weapon tensed. Leah whimpered, raising her doll like a shield. "Get away from him," she pleaded. Reagan's face softened. He knelt beside Leah, gently lifting her doll from her grip. "Hey," he said, voice gentler. You're safe. You're my guest." He pulled Leah closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. She trembled, but didn't push away. I realized then that lean teenager's blood on Leah's pajama top was fresh, warmed by rain. My stomach roiled. "You hurt her?" I said, voice low. "She volunteered," Reagan whispered. "I told her. If Katie wouldn't come, I'd need someone to remind her." My mind reeled. "Volunteers? You told a 14-year-old to suffer to teach her sister a lesson?" He flinched as if struck. "No, she begged me. She thought if I saved her sister that night, maybe I could save her." Images flooded me. That living room 5 years ago, the hostage standoff, the muzzle flash as I shot the gun out of Reagan's hand. The mother's face, ashen, pinned against the wall, sobbing. The children, eyes wide, panicked. I'd let Leah and Katie go that night. I carried them outside, put them in my cruiser, then loaded Reagan into the back of a cruiser. I told them, everything will be okay. But that was 5 years ago. Now, Leah knelt crying, drawing my rifle tighter. Reagan rested his hand on her shoulder, like he was comforting her but really controlling her. I took a step closer, keeping my gun trained on Reagan's chest. "Drop the knife," I said, though I didn't see a knife. Leah reached under her shirt, eyes locked on me, revealing bruised ribs, cuts along her flank. I swallowed. He did this to her so Katie would remember. Reagan's face contorted, tears streaming. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry." My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to load Leah onto my shoulder, run back to the cruiser, call in a full rescue. But the other part recognized that if I moved too fast, I'd send Leah into genuine terror, and Reagan might react violently. I kept my weapon steady. "Reagan, I need you to let Leah go. Right now." He closed his eyes and nodded. "I want to," he said, voice cracking. "But I don't know how." I nearly thought, "You do know how." Reagan's eyes flickered with recognition. His jaw tightened. And then he forced himself to stand. He released Leah, who crumpled onto the forest floor. I lowered my gun, keeping it raised, but letting the barrel dip toward the ground. I stepped forward, extending a hand toward Leah. "Katie's safe," I told her. "But we need to get you out." Leah stood on trembling legs, clutching her doll. She looked at Reagan, eyes burning. "I hate you," she spat. Reagan flinched as though expecting a blow. He blinked, masked by shadow, and said, "I know." I slipped my cuffs out, leaving them clipped to my belt. "Walk with me," I said to Leah. I guided her to my cruiser, wrapping my jacket around her shoulders. She clung to me like a lifeline, burying her face in the fabric. I turned back to Reagan. "You need to come with us," I said. He stared across the clearing, where moonlight glinted on the silo's wall. He swallowed, shook his head slowly. "I can't," he said. "Not yet." I felt anger flare, sharp, hot. "You're coming now, Reagan. You're done. I won't ask again." His face crumpled, tears streaming down. He looked like a child who'd been asked to sign his own death sentence. Instead of stepping toward us, he turned, back pressed to a tree, his hood falling away to reveal every line on his face. "She won't forgive me," he said quietly. "Not ever." My hand tightened on my holster. I tried to stay calm. "Reagan, we'll figure this out, but you can't stay out here alone." He shook his head, gaze fixed on the silo. He didn't move. I took another step. Last chance. He closed his eyes, took a slow breath, then ran. I fired once, just a warning shot. The echo thundered through the trees. Reagan didn't stop. He sprinted away, heading toward the far side of the clearing. I took off after him, voice hoarse. "Reagan, don't make me do this." He dove behind a fallen log as if the forest itself swallowed him. I pounded my chest, inhaled ragged. I raised my flashlight, sweeping the beam over leaf litter and moss-covered rocks. No sign of him. The clearing was empty. I felt my heart shatter as I realized Reagan had vanished again. I turned back to Leah and Katie, who had joined me at the edge of the clearing. Their small forms huddled together. Katie's face was blank, eyes empty. Leah's shoulders heaved, lips quivering. I knelt before them, voice trembling. "We have to go. More officers are coming." They nodded, neither arguing. I gently ushered them toward the cruiser, each step heavy, weighted by the knowledge that Reagan had made this choice. He'd let them stay, then vanished when forced to face me. His mind had fractured long ago, and tonight he'd splintered me too. I glanced back at the forest, where the moon cast thin shafts of light. Somewhere out there, Reagan hid, watching us leave. I lowered my head as I shepherded the girls into the back seat. Before I climbed in, I paused. I reached into my pocket, rubbed the edge of that Polaroid, Katie asleep in her bed. I slipped it onto the dashboard, where the windshield's glow fell on her peaceful face. It felt wrong. A static image of innocence when the last hours had been pure horror. "Are you okay?" I asked Katie, my voice soft. She was silent. She stared straight ahead, as though seeing something I couldn't. I hesitated, then reached over, gently brushing her hair from her forehead. She gave me a ghost of a smile. "I'm okay," she said. Leah blinked, looking at me, her doll pressed to her chest. "What about Reagan?" I closed my eyes. "We'll find him," I promised. "He needs help." Leah's eyes went cold. "He wants Katie to remember." I swallowed. Her words echoed something Reagan had said. I realized then that there were no promises strong enough to break the bonds Reagan had forged with those sisters. He'd resurrected the past and twisted it into something neither of us could fix. I shut the door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The cruiser's headlights pierced the edge of the trees, illuminating the muddy path we'd come from. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Katie's reflection was small, fragile, her eyes distant. Leah's was blank, perhaps afraid to hope. I shifted into gear and pulled onto the road, the engine rumbling low. The forest receded, replaced by the dull glow of overhead lights from the station in the distance. Each mile felt heavy, like I carried the weight of their broken lives in my chest. As we neared the station, the K-9 unit's van pulled out, dogs barking excitedly. I slowed, letting them pass. I nodded to the handler, who gave me a look of sympathy. He'd seen enough nights like this. I guided the cruiser into the bay of the ER entrance. Paramedics hurried forward, rushing Leah and Katie inside. I killed the engine, unbuckled my seatbelt, and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. My uniform felt soaked in my own sweat. I rubbed my temples. The station lights flickered behind me, steady and sterile. Dispatch buzzed again. "Delta 6, do you copy?" I taped the mic. "Delta 6 here. Suspect still at large, road closures in effect. Units massing near the old mill, ETA K9, 3 minutes. I closed my eyes. 3 minutes. That was how long it would take for me to gather myself, don my vest, retrieve my gear, and head out into that night once more. 3 minutes before I was back in the forest, chasing a shadow that maybe didn't want to be caught. I took a deep breath and climbed out of the cruiser. The chill of the night air hit me, as if I'd been inside a sauna and stepped into a cooler. My radio crackled with activity, wheels turning, search grids forming. I slapped my duty belt tighter around my waist, checked my flashlight, thumbed my sidearm to make sure it was seated. I paused, closed my eyes, and thought of the note. "Find me where memories fade." My mind flashed to that hallway 5 years ago. the flicker of lights in that living room. Katie's tears, Reagan's gun, my fingers squeezing the trigger, the kick of the shot, his body collapsing. How I'd told them, "You're going to be okay," even though I wasn't sure I believed it. I opened my eyes. I swallowed hard. There would be no rest tonight. I squared my shoulders and stepped into the shadows, heading back toward that forest where Reagan lingered, fragile, broken, bound to a past that refused to stay buried. My every instinct screamed that this chase would end with more ghosts than justice. But I had one choice: keep going until I found him or burned to ash trying. The station doors slid shut behind me with a hiss. I shouldered my flashlight, flipped it on, and plunged into the darkness once again. The forest breathed around me, expectant, as if it knew the night's real terror had only just begun. No sirens now, just the steady beat of my boots hitting the ground and the strained rhythm of my own heartbeat. I whispered to myself as I disappeared beneath the canopy, "Where memories fade," and I moved forward, knowing the next steps would anchor me to a truth I wasn't sure I could survive. We moved beneath the canopy, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness like a blade. The forest floor was uneven, rotten logs half buried in moss, slick leaves that threatened to send me stumbling. Every footstep felt jagged against my nerves. I kept my eyes fixed on the path Reagan would have taken, recalling the prints I'd followed before they vanished. His boot treads and Katie's tiny sneaker marks, abruptly swallowed by the leaves. Now Leah and Katie were safe inside the ER. I alone felt the forest's weight bearing down on me. I reached the spot where Reagan had dove behind the log, the broken pine needles scattered like shards of glass. The moonlight formed shifting shapes across the earth, and I realized how little light remained beneath the trees. I knelt, brushing my gloved fingers over the mud that had clung to Reagan's boots. He'd slipped away feet first into deeper shadows. No scent of his cologne, no whisper of breath. Just the forest's hush. My radio crackled. The K9 unit was stalled at the edge of the perimeter. K9 had picked up a faint scent, but lost it near a ravine to the north. I clicked off the mic. The dispatchers wouldn't understand the urgency in my pulse. They didn't know that Reagan's mind had fractured around here, that he'd returned to places of raw memory. I rose and pressed on, pushing branches aside as if moving through a living barrier. My heart thumped like a jackhammer. Up ahead, the tree line opened into a small clearing. The ground leveled out, and I saw the silhouette of the grain silo, its metal sides smeared with moonlight and grime. It towered, cold and silent. I paused at the clearing's edge, scanning left and right. The stillness felt uncanny, as though the world held its breath. And then I caught sight of footprints. 2 sets leading deeper into the darkness on the far side. One set was Reagan's, heavy and clear. The other was smaller. Leah's? No, too small, too slender. I crouched, shone the beam toward them. Tiny tracks, no bigger than toddler prints. But Leah was a teenager, not a toddler. Panic coiled in my gut. I followed those prints farther than I'd come before, down a narrow slope where the earth slanted toward a stagnant creek. The prints led to the water's edge, then stopped. No footprints beyond. I knelt, dipping a finger into the muddy bank. The mud was cold and thick, but the tracks were too shallow to indicate someone had waded through. I frowned, lifting my light to the water. The creek's surface was still, reflecting the canopy like a broken mirror. I thought I saw movement, a tilt of a head beneath the water, but it vanished before my mind could register it as real. I rose. Everything inside me screamed, "Follow the creek." I edged along its bank, careful not to slip. The muddy path gave way to larger rocks, slick and mottled with algae. My shoes slipped once, sending the beam darting. For a moment, I feared I'd lose sight of the path. But then the creek bent, and I saw the silhouette of a collapsed tree bridging the water. The branches extended across the creek like skeletal fingers. There, lying atop the gnarled roots, was Leah's doll. Clown face half scraped, one button eye missing. I froze. The doll was soaked through. Its fabric was stiff with mud and what looked like, no, not blood, something darker, filthier. I knelt, picked it up, and felt the doll's arm slip out of my fingers as it slithered like a dead fish in my hand. I flipped it, and the flashlight caught a wet stain on its chest. Dark crimson, resembling dried blood. But it wasn't quite dried. It gave slightly under my gloved thumb, like a bruise that hadn't healed. My stomach clenched. I heard a soft flutter behind me, leaves brushing against something sliding across the riverbank. I spun, shining the light, but saw only shadows. Then I noticed a shoe partially submerged in the creek, mud caked on its sole. It was Leah's sneaker, pink, scuffed, soaked, as though she'd tried to step into the water and something pulled her further in. I swallowed, gulped air through my throat muscles as I rose. Footprints beside the doll and shoe were sparse, almost like the weight of a body had been dragged. Grotesquely, the mud formed a shallow groove, a clue that someone had been here, perhaps not on foot. My mind surged with dread. I called out softly, "Leah? Leah, are you okay?" My voice cracked. Only silence answered. The trees stood rigid, and the water gurgled softly against the rocks. The only sign that a living creature had passed this way was the drowned doll and the single sneaker. I stepped closer, shining my light down into the creek. The water was murky, brown and green, reflecting nothing but twisted shapes. For a fleeting moment I imagined Leah trapped beneath the surface, terrified, clawing at the riverbed. My skin crawled, cold sweat blossoming on my neck. I felt bile rise in my throat. I knelt at the edge, extending my arm, trying to peer deeper. Then I saw it. A shin-length boot, wedged between two rocks, Reagan's boot. The toe protruded, stiff and caked. My breath hitched. I realized he hadn't walked through the creek. He'd tried to cross at that collapsed tree, slipped, and fallen. The current here was slow, but enough to pin him between rocks, and if he fell, he might be unconscious, injured, or worse. I dropped to my knees, stretching out to reach him. But my hand didn't touch anything solid, just the cold wet of the creek. I shone the beam deeper and saw the shape, a dark form, half visible under the water's surface. My pulse hammered. I splashed my hand into the water, groped for him. My gloved fingers brushed something, fabric that felt like a coat sleeve, and then his pant leg. I yanked upward, but it slipped, slipping away in the current. I stumbled, nearly toppling into the creek as I lost my grip. "Reagan!" I shouted, voice raw. I took a breath, sliding off my boots, pushing shins into cold water. My uniform hem soaked instantly. The chill bit through skin, making me gasp. I waded deeper, water rising to mid-calf. I saw him then, face down, half submerged. A sliver of moonlight caught his hair, darkened by water. I lunged, grabbed his wrist and yanked. He disappeared beneath the surface and I jerked back, nearly dragged in. I managed to wrestle his arm free, hauling him onto a large boulder. His face was pale, lips blue. Water streamed from his soaked clothes. I pressed my hands to his chest, searching for breath. His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't wake. His breathing was shallow, barely a gasp. I felt relief, but it twisted into despair when I saw Leah's small body pressed against the rock beside him. She lay curled, wet hair plastered to her scalp, mud in her nostrils. She wasn't moving either. I stood frozen for a moment, horror burrowing cold into my bones. Reagan's slippery coat tangled around my wrist as I reached for Leah. She wasn't breathing. I sank to my knees, cradling her head. My hand pressed against her chest. No rise. My radio log jammed in my mind. How I'd told her that Reagan would let her go. I'd promised help. I'd betrayed that promise by letting him slip away into the night. I shook her shoulder, calling her name. Leah, wake up. Leah. My flashlight beam gave her a ghostly pallor. I slapped her cheek. She flinched. Eyelids fluttered, but no breath followed. I felt bile rise in my mouth, and I swallowed it down as I checked her pulse. Faint, but weak. I turned to Reagan again. His face was tilted downward, water dripping from his chin. I slapped his cheek, tried to shake him awake. "Reagan!" I shouted, but his head lolled back limply. His eyes opened then, vacant as if he surveyed his own shock. He blinked, looked at me, half recognizing. I didn't have time for guilt. I hoisted one arm under his shoulders, the other beneath his knees, draping him over my hip. I stammered into my radio, voice ragged. "Delta 6 to dispatch. Medical emergency. 2 individuals down in creek. Possible drowning. Coordinates." My mind stalled over the numbers as I carried him toward the bank, each step agonizing through the cold water. Reaching the shore, I laid him on the mud, then rushed back for Leah. She lay small and still. I grabbed her shoulders, trying to rouse her. My hands shook in the moonlit mud. I pressed a thumb to her wrist, weak pulse, but there. I scooped her up, migraine-like pins driving through my skull as I staggered back to the bank. I placed her beside Reagan, rummaged for my radio mic. "Dispatch, need immediate airlift. Remote location near Millhaven Creek. 2 victims unstable, over." I dropped the radio, ran a hand across my face. My uniform was soaked, water pooling in my boots. I pulled my flashlight from my belt, aimed it back at Reagan, then Leah. Both gasped, eyes flickering open. Leah whimpered. Reagan groaned, spit water from his mouth. My relief was tangled with guilt. My failure had nearly cost them both their lives. I leaned over them, voice trembling. "Hold on, just hold on." I checked their pulses again, rapid, erratic. I felt numb, as if separated from my own body. The forest seemed to fade around me, replaced by harsh medical orders echoing in my mind. Keep airway clear, monitor breathing, maintain body heat. I grabbed my jacket from the bank, wrapped Leah in it, then Reagan. Their wet clothes clung to them like cold shackles. I laid them side by side on the muddy bank. Suddenly, a distant whoop, the thunder of helicopter blades. The medevac had arrived, rotor wash whipping the trees, flickering branches and crashing bursts of shadow. I shone my flashlight toward the sky, guiding the helicopter down. The beam touched the chopper's landing skids as it hovered, then set down with a bone-rattling roar. The door swung open, paramedics streaming out with a gurney. They worked fast, sliding Leah onto the stretcher, hooking IV lines, listening to her chest with a stethoscope. Reagan was next, wrapped in blankets, their faces drawn with concern. I backed away, letting them work. The helicopter's light flooded the creek, revealing the twisted tangle of rocks and water where I'd pulled them from. The mud was churned, footprints and handprints smeared. The doll lay by the creek, soaked and abandoned. Suddenly, the forest felt brutal in its indifference. Trees standing silent, leaves trembling in wind. A paramedic looked up at me, voice gentle but urgent. "Do you know what happened?" I shook my head, kneeling aside. I didn't have words. The note lay nearby, caught on a submerged twig. "Find me where memories fade." I realized its meaning. Reagan had led me here, to the creek where memories could drown. And now Leah might drown too. my failure had pushed them to the brink. They loaded Reagan and Leah into the helicopter. I watched as the stretcher lifted, a flurry of blankets and limbs. The chopper's blades roared. Their shouts were swallowed by the thrum of the engine. Then the helicopter lifted, carrying them both away toward the hospital lights glowing in the distance. I remained kneeling at the bank, drawing in ragged breaths. The forest grew quieter without the rotor wash. The creek babbled softly, as if nothing had happened. The doll lay face down in the mud. I reached out and flipped it. The clown's one glassy eye stared at me, chipped fabric stiff. I bent and picked it up, brushing leaf litter from its chest. The blood-like stain had grown darker in moonlight. I pressed my thumb into it, but the stain was stubborn, faded only slightly. I rose, holding the doll in one hand, pushing through tears that burned behind my eyes. The mud clung to my boots as I walked back toward my cruiser, barely visible at the edge of the clearing. My uniform hung heavy, water dripping. My heart felt shredded. I felt regret like a stone lodged in my throat. The forest floor was littered with footprints, broken branches, and scattered memories. I climbed into the cruiser, slammed the door. The engine wouldn't start at first. I turned the key again and it roared to life. The headlights illuminated the path back to the road. I wiped my face, drawing in a breath that felt ragged and raw. I tucked the doll onto the passenger seat beside Elijah's evidence bag. They were both drenched, both broken. One a suspect, one a child. A pair bound by tragedy. As I pulled onto the road, I caught sight of the grain silo receding into darkness. Its silver walls glinted under the moon, appearing more ominous than before, as if it had claimed pieces of Reagan and Leah's lives, devouring them in its shadows. I slowed, rolling beside the silo's base. I cut the engine and opened the door, stepping out onto the shoulder. The night was silent. No sirens, no voices, just the rhythm of my own heartbeat and the whisper of wind in the trees. I walked to the creek's edge, where the mud had dried into cracks. The note lay abandoned, drifting in a shallow puddle. I reached for it, folding it tightly between my fingers. I thought of Reagan's face as he'd slipped beneath the water, eyes wide with regret or relief. I couldn't tell which. And Leah's limp form, tiny and fragile, torn between hope and submission. The creek's water swirled around my boots. I realized I could follow those same waters until they led somewhere new, a place where memories couldn't follow, a place where pain could be drowned. I closed my eyes. The doll's single glass eye glinted beneath the moon, as though watching me choose. I stepped into the creek, water creeping over my shoes, swirling around my ankles. I sank deeper, knees, thighs, until the current tugged at my legs. I gasped, icy fingers curling around my calves, but I didn't pull back. I closed my eyes, feeling the current push me forward, carrying me toward the shadows that laced the river's edge. My heart pounded, fear and despair mingling into a cold clarity. I thought, maybe this is where memories fade, here, where the water sweeps the past away. I realized I was drowning, not in water, but in the weight of all I'd failed, Reagan, Leah, Katie. I felt the current pull harder, threatening to tip me off balance. I clenched the note in my hand as the water rose to my waist. I stared at the shimmering surface, where moonlight danced in fractured pieces. And then, a quiet, devastating thought settled over me. I could never save them, nor could I save myself. The current tugged at my feet, urging me into the deeper water. I took a final breath, closing my eyes to the forest's dark canopy. The creek whispered around me, carrying his words forward. Find me where memories fade. I let go of the note. It slipped from my fingers, floating away, caught on a ripple. The moonlight flickered on its edges as it drifted into the depths. The water closed over it, carrying it beneath the surface, carrying me with it. And in that moment, the culmination of every mistake, every choice, everything I'd tried to stop and couldn't, settled in my bones. There is no escape from the gravity of memory. Not for them, not for me. The creek swallowed my last breath, leaving only darkness and echoing silence. No siren, no rescue, just the water's endless flow and the realization that I had finally been outpaced by the night. I felt the cold press of water against my thighs, lifting me until I was submerged up to my chest. My lungs burned with panic, an animal's instinct clawing up my throat for oxygen. The current tugged at my boots, urging me deeper until the water lapped over my belt line. In that moment, the creek's chill transformed into something darker, an all-consuming force pulling me toward the bent silhouette of the riverbed. My heart pounded, each beat echoing through my skull like a hammer. I swallowed a lungful of cold water when I inhaled too sharply, choking as it filled my throat. Instinctively, I gave one desperate stroke that lifted me a fraction, but the current was stronger. A wave of vertigo washed over me and I lurched forward until my face hit the water's surface. Gasps of air escaped my lips, but the oxygen didn't stay long. The creek's current yanked me down again. My head broke the surface once more, my eyes waterlogged and vision blurred by tears and spray. With each panicked gasp, I took in more water, my nostrils flaring, my mouth open, scraping the surface for air that vanished the moment I tried to swallow. I thrashed my arms, but the current spun me sideways, pressing my chest to the muddy creek bottom. My legs tangled in submerged roots, and pain shot through my left ankle where a jagged rock had scraped it. A bloom of crimson mixed with the murky water. I tried to kick free, but the gnarled roots held me fast. My chest burned, every muscle screaming for relief, but the water muffled my screams into silent panic. A flicker of moonlight cut through the surface above me. I raised a trembling hand, trying to punch upward, to break the water's grip. My fingertips grazed the underside of a submerged log. If I could just reach it, if I could brace against that hard wood, maybe I could push myself free. I scrabbled at the log's slippery side, my hands slipping on the slimy wood. The current tugged me again, and I slid down, throat constricting. In that downward spiral, my mind unraveled into shards of memory, fragments of faces, half-formed regrets. I saw Katie's tear-streaked expression when I'd left her alone in that hospital corridor after hours of questioning. I remembered the blank look Leah had given me when she realized I might be the one who delivered her to Reagan's twisted rescue. I felt the weight of every promise I'd made to protect, to guarantee safety, and recognized that my failures had built the current now dragging me under. A burst of pain shot through my right shoulder as I collided with a submerged rock. My head snapped back, the impact sending shockwaves through my skull. I tasted blood. The water turned surlily red around me. The creek lightened with inflamed silt, swirling like crimson smoke. Dizziness blurred my vision. I squeezed my eyes shut, hearing the soft trickle of water sliding past my ears. My chest tightened, breath stuttering in short, painful jerks. I felt something brush against my shoulder, an underwater branch, Reagan's cold hand. In a panic, I lashed out, clawing blindly at the murk. My fingers closed on something wet and foreign, Leah's doll. The plush clown face pressed against my palm. Its one glass eye stared back at me through the brown haze. I clutched it, the doll's chipped fabric sticking to my hand like a grotesque talisman, and tore my gaze back down. The current had shifted, settling me near the muddy bottom. I lay there, half embedded in silt and debris, my boots anchored in the soft earth. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs felt heavy, weighted by waterlogged clothing and the dense ache of exhaustion. Each attempt burned with pain and resistance. My mind reeled. I needed to breathe. I needed air. I needed to swim. But the world had narrowed into a single beam of moonlight, a silver column descending from the surface above. It illuminated floating leaves and the dim outlines of submerged rocks, but I couldn't reach it. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched into eternal pulses, each heartbeat a lonely drum. The memory of fresh air, crisp and cool, haunted me. I recalled the smell of hospital antiseptic, the bright fluorescent lights in the ER room, the hum of monitors beside Leah's bed. I thought of Reagan's hollow eyes when I'd found him in the creek, his arm rising in a strangled plea for help. That look, "I'm sorry," had been my last glimpse before I lost sight of him. Now, my apologies clotted in my throat, smashing against my ribs as I breathed water. I remembered Captain Mendoza's voice, reminding me that a good officer never leaves anyone behind. I had left them, left Reagan and Leah to die in that cold current, because I'd been too focused on whether I could save myself. My shame flickered brighter than the moon's reflection, and I realized with horror that if I died here, every promise, every oath would vanish. My lungs burned, a white-hot ache that eclipsed even the river's chill. The mud under my thighs sifted between my legs as I tried one final push, but my wounded ankle refused to cooperate. The roots held me fast, 2 fingers of the forest gripping me until the earth claimed my last strength. My head drifted downward, and the moonlight's silver column shrank to a pinprick. I felt the current lift me slightly as the water's heady coldness settled in my lungs. When the world flipped above me, I saw the distorted moon, a pale and accusing face observing my surrender. A small gray fish darted past, brushing my cheek, oblivious to the human tragedy unfolding in its domain. I tried to raise my arm again, to thrust my hand toward the glimmering air, but the effort caused a jolt of pain in my side. My vision swam. Black spots crowded the edges of my sight. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears like a distant alarm or a dying radio signal. I thought I heard Katie's voice calling my name, soft, echoing, "Officer Reynolds," but it was gone before I could respond. Then Leah's whisper, "He tried to save me." It felt like she was both next to me and half a continent away. My chest contracted in a last desperate gasp. My lungs convulsed, seeking oxygen that was no longer on offer. Darkness crept in from the edges, spreading like ink across fragile parchment. My eyelids fluttered, and the narrow beam of moonlight flickered and vanished. Beneath the silt, I felt myself slipping entirely beneath the water's surface, into an alien weightlessness. The current cradled me, guided me downward, until my body settled into a hollow in the creek bed. I felt mud fill my nostrils, a gritty paste that suffocated every remaining gasp. In the suffocating quiet, my mind drifted to a single, relentless thought. I was exactly where I deserved to be, caught in the ripple of every choice I'd broken, every life I'd failed. The forest above me seemed to exhale, its dark tendrils weaving around my final heartbeat. A sliver of moonlight seeped down, illuminating the curve of my bloodied uniform and the clown doll resting on my chest. The doll's one glass eye caught that faint light, reflecting it back like a warning. Then even that shimmer died. My last breath escaped me in a bubble of light, carried off by the current. As darkness gathered, a single line echoed in the cavern of my mind, empty, broken, and unforgettable. I was searching for a place where memories fade, only to discover that some memories drown you first.